The wind carried the sulfur-scented warmth of dragons long before I smelled the sea. Standing upon the highest parapet of Orion's crest, a fortress carved by ancient Valyrian magic into the black rock of a peninsula reaching into the sunset sea, I gazed out over a kingdom that had never been permitted the luxury of self-rule. Valyria's shadow stretched across continents, and the 7 kingdoms of Westeros were long since tamed. Everyone knew the story of how the dragons first came to these shores, not as exiles fleeing doom, but as conquerors who had foreseen and prevented the doom of old Valyria. By harnessing their might and uniting under the blazing symbol of the Dragon Lords, they had ensured that the freehold remained unbroken. Once, Westeros had been a fractured land of petty kings, with proud banners snapping over endless moors and mountains. But that had changed 3 centuries past, when my ancestors arrived without warning, riding fire-breathing beasts of near-mythic power. Now, the Targaryens, the Valerians, and all the ancient houses of Valyria shaped this entire swath of the world, forging it into the farthest dominion of the freehold. Some whispered that any living soul in Westeros was free only so long as the Dragon Lords willed it. The land's old name, the 7 Kingdoms, had practically become an artifact from a half-forgotten age. To be born with Valyrian blood was to be counted among the chosen. Our hair was often as pale as spun silver, and our eyes glimmered like gemstones in the sunlight. So the stories said, though in reality, Valyrians came in many shades of silver or platinum hair, and our eyes varied from pale lilac to vibrant violet or deep azure. Our legacy bound us to the dragons through ancient sorcery etched into our bloodlines. We possessed a unique connection to these majestic beasts. Some said it was as if our hearts beat in time with theirs. Of course, that also meant high expectations, few illusions about what the world demanded of us, and a keen awareness of how quickly power could shift if we allowed ourselves to grow complacent. In old Valyria, knowledge of sorcery and steel had been matched only by the arrogance that came with absolute dominion. Such arrogance was nearly our downfall once. But we had foreseen the catastrophe, and by channeling the greatest sorceries of our day, we preserved the freehold from volcanic destruction. We sealed the fault lines in the peninsula, tamed the fires in the 14 Flames, and our empire marched onward with new purpose. I, Daenerys Maegor, stood in that cold coastal wind, letting the swirling hair around my face remind me of home. I had been sent to Orion's Crest 2 months ago to oversee the pacification of the western shores. As the second daughter of House Maegor, one of the noble families closest to the Targaryens in blood and prestige, my life was filled with tasks meant to prove my worth. Every few years, a rumor of rebellion in some corner of Westeros sprang up, reminding Valyria that it was never enough to defeat a kingdom once. The hearts of men chafed under foreign rule, especially from across the sea. Yet how could they truly revolt? We had dragons. We had sorcery. We commanded the greatest army ever assembled. Still, my father had taught me that power eroded if it was not constantly shored up. A farmer who left his fields untended, trusting that they would always produce, soon found himself without a harvest. There were few places as cold and forbidding as Orion's Crest in late autumn. When I arrived, rain lashed the stone walls and the gales from the sunset sea were strong enough to tear the flags from the battlements. The fortress was perched on a basalt cliff that the Valyrian builders had shaped with runes and incantations. Within its walls, a garrison of 500 unsmiling soldiers from the freehold patrolled the corridors. Most were men from old Valyria, men who had grown up with illusions of grandeur. Others were local recruits, second or third sons from ancient Westerosi houses who had knelt to the freehold and been rewarded with the chance to serve under the dragon banner. Their loyalty was not absolute, far from it, but in a sense they felt chosen too, so long as their families enjoyed the protection of Valyria. Some suspected we used subtle spells to bind them to us. Perhaps we did. Yet it was also true that many lords found their fortunes soared higher under Valyrian rule than under their fractious old kings. I could not help thinking how different life must have been here before my people arrived. They once had petty rivalries, alliances sealed by marriage and undone by betrayal, a legacy of strife as thick as the north's snowy drifts. Their tongues named the land Westeros, but we had carved it into administrative provinces that fed into our vast network of trade and governance. We allowed local lords to keep their titles and lands, provided they bent the knee and paid homage to the freehold. Some men bristled at being tethered to a power an ocean away. Others found security in our rule. The knowledge that a single dragon in flight could reduce a rebellious stronghold to a pit of ash seldom left the conversation. It was a potent deterrent. Still, there were rumors. Strange tidings from the western shores told of roving bands of swordsmen who carried tattered banners from a time before the conquest. They struck at caravans paying tribute to House Maegor or House Targaryen, then disappeared into the hilly forests, leaving no trace but smoldering wagons and blood-stained roads. High atop the fortress walls, I had spent 2 months gathering reports, dispatching scouts, and fruitlessly waiting for my own dragon to be sent across the sea. I was of an age to receive my first mount. My father assured me it would be one of the proud fireworms that soared over the 14 flames. But the logistics were complicated. Shipping a newly hatched dragon to Westeros could lead to the creature's death if not handled by skilled dragonbinders. And because no full-grown dragon was easily parted from its rider, I was forced to watch the horizon and rely on local cavalry as well as the garrison's smaller drakes that were used mostly for scouting. Their presence was enough to frighten most potential rebels, but they lacked the unbridled might of true war dragons. I had to proceed carefully. On this day, I was waiting for my final scouting party to return, scanning the skies for a glimpse of a drake's silhouette. My breath condensed in the brisk air, forming tiny puffs that drifted from my lips. The ocean stretched below me, stormy and gray, crashing against jagged rocks that had claimed more than a few ships over the centuries. Then I heard it, a distant cry, a draconic screech cutting through the wind. A moment later, I spotted a small shape gliding over the water. It grew larger, revealing the outline of a slender drake, tinted greenish bronze. Upon its back, I could just make out the figure of a rider hunched low. My heart beat faster. If this was my scout, perhaps he carried news. I headed swiftly down the stone staircase into the courtyard, the clank of my boots echoing in the gloom. There, on the wide flagstones where dragons of all sizes were once tethered, I awaited the drake's landing. Soldiers, stable hands, and a few scribes all paused in their duties to watch. Even a small drake's arrival was worthy of note in the routine of fortress life. The creature swooped over the walls, stirring grit in its wake, and alighted with a flurry of wings. Its tail lashed the air, scattering a barrel full of spears, but no one complained. The rider swung down quickly. A moment later, I recognized Saran, a loyal scout from my personal retinue. Her usually flushed face was drained and tense beneath her braided silver hair. She bowed quickly, her palm pressed to her chest. "My lady," she said, breath ragged from the cold wind. "I bring tidings from the western road. Lord Temnor's caravan is late, as we suspected, and we've found proof of an ambush. The wagons were torn apart, cargo stolen, men butchered. We even found Valyrian coins strewn along the roadside, half buried in mud. It looks like the work of the so-called Greyhawks, the band we've heard about. There was only one survivor, badly wounded, and he claims the bandits were led by a knight bearing an ancient sigil from the days before the conquest." An unwelcome chill ran through me. I had gleaned from rumor that these Greyhawks were not merely opportunistic raiders but rebels tied to an old bloodline of House Hoare or one of the other storied dynasties that once ruled the Iron Islands and parts of the western coasts. If true, this spelled trouble. I gestured for Saran to continue. "We tried to track them," she said, "but the storms covered their trail. All we found was the ruin they left behind, and one of our outriders fell to an arrow. We had to retreat before we lost more. They melt away like ghosts." I clenched my jaw. Such news brought me no pleasure. A direct challenge to Valyrian authority was not something that could be left to fester. Not if I planned to keep my post and earn my father's respect. I looked at the men and women standing around us. "We must show these rebels that their theft of cargo and slaughter of men is an act against the freehold itself," I said, my voice echoing off the basalt walls. "We will root them out, burn them out if we must." I turned to my castellan, a broad-shouldered Valyrian named Andrus, who had served in campaigns from Lys to the Stepstones. "Mobilize 20 of our best riders. Saran, you will guide them back to where you found the remains of Lord Temnor's caravan. If the weather is favorable tomorrow, I'll accompany you." Andrus stiffened slightly, his expression concerned. "My lady, are you certain you wish to go personally? If we must flush out these Greyhawks, we might be venturing into rough territory, possibly ambushes. Your safety." "My safety is guaranteed by my wits and my sword, and if that fails, by the might of Valyria," I replied, striving to keep my tone firm but not haughty. "I cannot simply send men into danger while I sit comfortably on these walls, content to read reports." My father once said that true leadership is earned on the field, not in the counting rooms. Andros bowed with respect, if not enthusiasm. My authority here was not total. My father held the official governorship of the Western Shores, though I had been empowered to act on his behalf. Andros was widely known to be loyal, but also wary of losing a valued member of a prominent Valyrian house. Regardless, he offered no more argument. His posture signaled that he would obey my command, setting in motion the next day's mission. For a moment, I felt a prickle of excitement. Since I had arrived, official tasks had kept me mostly cooped up in the fortress. Here was a chance to do something that mattered. That evening, I dined in the fortress's grand hall, a dark chamber of black stone and flickering torches. My seat was at a long table with lesser Valyrian officers and a handful of Westerosi lords who had sworn fealty. The tension was subtle but undeniable. On one side, the officers conversed about the broader empire, the situation back in the freehold, the squabbles and Essos, while on the other side, the Westerosi lords picked at their food with a certain caution, carefully measuring every word. It was the gulf between conqueror and conquered, even if centuries had passed since the first dragon soared over King's Landing, which, ironically, was no longer the seat of any king but rather the western offices for the Valyrian administration. I spoke mostly to a man called Lord Baldwin, a minor lord who had bent the knee decades ago. He was a tall figure, uncommonly tall by any measure, with a hawkish nose and thinning auburn hair. His dark eyes mirrored the torchlight with an uncanny glitter. He reminded me of a crow perched near carrion, always watching. He had come to Orian's Crest with a retinue of 10 men to pay respects and deliver tribute in the form of grain and local produce. But I suspected he was also scouring for any sign of weakness he could exploit. These Westerosi lords were always balancing the benefits of loyalty to Valyria with their private dreams of regaining lost independence. Baldwin recounted how storms had battered the coastline, how peasants were grumbling about taxes, standard talk. But something in his voice suggested that dissatisfaction ran deeper. I pressed him casually. "There are rumors," he said, swirling wine in his goblet, "that some folks in the villages welcome these attacks on the freehold's caravans. They think the bandits are forging a path back to independence. Foolish, yes, but peasant minds are easily stirred by drama." He eyed me. "You must be cautious, my lady. Rebellions start as embers. A few rabble-rousers here, a self-proclaimed knight there. Then, if left unchecked, it becomes wildfire." I set down my cup. "Their wildfire is easily quenched by Dragonfire. They should remember that the days before the conquest did not bring them peace and prosperity, only ceaseless war among themselves. Under the freehold, they have roads, trade, security. Ah, but some folks find honor in fighting their oppressors even if the fight is doomed," Baldwin commented, his smile so thin that it was nearly invisible. "You might be surprised how many would willingly take up arms if they believed they had a chance." I did not care for his tone, the sly insinuation that we were indeed oppressors, that the entire arrangement was just waiting to be overturned. But I forced myself to remain calm and instead thanked him for his insights. The night wore on with more wine and meaningless pleasantries until I excused myself. Outside the hall, in the corridor lined with flickering sconces, I exhaled, wondering if all this tension in Westeros would ever truly fade. The next morning, though dawn was hidden by storm clouds, my party set out from Orian's Crest. A frigid drizzle fell, turning the dirt roads to muck. True to my word, I rode with Andros, Saran, and a group of 20 cavalrymen, 10 from Valyria, 10 local knights sworn to my father's service. Before we departed, the stable hands offered me the fortress's best mount, a fiery gray courser. I took the reins and swung into the saddle. It was far from the exhilarating flight of a dragon, but there was something stirring about leading men into the wild on horseback. We set out along the coastal road, heading west toward the site of the ambush. The journey took us through a bleak landscape of rocky hills and twisted pines that creaked in the wind. Small villages dotted the coastline, their inhabitants peering at us warily from shuttered windows. Overhead, Saran's greenish-bronze drake circled, riding the currents, scanning for trouble. It was not a true war dragon, only about 15 feet in length with a narrower head and weaker flames, but it could still incinerate a man if pressed. More importantly, it provided a vantage from above, making surprise attacks less likely. The road was deserted. We saw evidence of older caravans, deep ruts left by wagon wheels, scraps of cloth snagged on branches. Several times we paused to dismount, scanning the area for footprints or any sign of hidden watchers. By midday we came upon the site of the ambush. It was worse than I had imagined. The ground was churned into mud and scattered with broken crates, rotting sacks of flour, torn banners. A stench of decay clung to the damp air. We found the remains of men, half buried or flung into nearby ditches. Crows perched on a split-open wagon, feasting on something I did not care to name. My soldiers spread out to search for survivors or clues. Some covered their faces with scarves. The carnage was raw and sobering. This was no random act of banditry, the purpose was terror and theft in equal measure. I felt a flicker of anger not just at the violence, but at the arrogance of these rebels. They must know what answer they would provoke from the freehold. Near one shattered wagon, Andrus found the body of a guard wearing a half-burnt surcoat with the sigil of Housemaker. The cargo had included gold coins minted in Valyria as well as important dispatches intended for the fortress. All was gone now. We discovered a half-dead horse in a ditch, its flanks slashed. One of our men ended its suffering. Beyond that, there was little to glean except footprints leading inland, into a dense forest. Saran took to the sky on her drake to survey from above, but the canopy was thick and the continuing drizzle made visibility poor. Nevertheless, we had the faint outline of a trail, deeper ruts and footprints pointed to an old logging road that headed west toward more rugged terrain. "We have no choice," I said, adjusting my cloak against the damp. "We follow. The Greyhawks must have a camp or hideout somewhere out there. We will find it." The men exchanged wary glances. The forest was known for its uneven ground, with sinkholes, twisting ravines, and half-forgotten ruins from the earliest days of Valyrian expansion. But none challenged my order. We moved forward, forging into the dim shadows. The pines and oaks closed in around us, swallowing the wind. The only sounds were the clop of hooves, the jingle of bridles, and the occasional rustling in the underbrush that made everyone reach for their weapons. It was a realm of gloom where the branches formed a tangled ceiling that blocked the sky. Saran's drake soared overhead, crying out now and then, but we could rarely see more than glimpses of its wings through the canopy. After an hour, the path narrowed, turning into a quagmire. Two of our horses slipped, nearly toppling their riders. The men dismounted to lead the animals more carefully. The drizzle had become a steady rain, dripping from branches and soaking our cloaks. Our breath clouded the air. We pressed on. Now and then we found signs that a group of armed men had recently passed, snapped branches, boot prints, and scuff marks where heavy crates might have been dragged. My pulse quickened. We were on the right track. Suddenly an arrow hissed past my head, burying itself in a tree trunk. Instantly a shout went up. "Ambush!" My men raised shields or sought cover behind the thick boles of oak. Another arrow struck a soldier's arm, making him cry out. I drew my sword, a slender Valyrian steel blade with a faint bluish sheen. The forest erupted in chaos, arrows flying, men yelling, horses rearing. Through the rain and the gloom, I glimpsed shapes darting behind trees. They were garbed in cloaks of gray and green, blending with the undergrowth. The Greyhawks had chosen their ground well. Andrus bellowed for a countercharge, but it was difficult to see our foes clearly. We crouched behind the broad trunks, scanning for movement. One of our knights, a Westerosi in service to my father, went down with an arrow in his leg. I glimpsed a flash of steel to the left, heard a clang and a grunt. It was no straightforward skirmish on open ground, it was a maze of wet leaves, slick mud, and low branches. In the confusion, Saran's drake was of limited help, but I heard it screeching above, unleashing a burst of flame that lit up the canopy momentarily. The smell of charred wood and sudden light told me at least some of the Greyhawks had been forced to scatter. I urged my courser forward, weaving between trunks. Another arrow whizzed by, scraping my pauldron. I hissed in pain as it grazed my shoulder. Gritting my teeth, I spurred the horse onward. My eyes scanned the gloom. Then I spotted them, a cluster of men huddled behind felled logs, one of them clutching a banner with the faint outline of a hawk. Rage flared in me. These men had not simply robbed a caravan, they had killed Valyrian subjects. They threatened to undermine our hold on these lands. The fact that they dared ambush us here, so close to the fortress, spoke volumes. I leaned low in the saddle, sword at the ready. With a shout I charged. My horse splashed through the mud. One of the rebels rose to fire an arrow, but I struck him across the chest, my blade carving through leather armor. He fell with a choked cry. Another tried to hack at my horse's flank with a short sword. Andrus barreled into him from the side, toppling him into the muck. Two more men advanced with spears, but one glance at the Valyrian steel in my hands gave them pause. My men pressed forward, swords ringing on shields. The sounds of violence echoed among the trees. My heart hammered. This was my first real taste of open combat outside training grounds and carefully orchestrated duels. I felt alive, terrified, and resolute all at once. Then, from behind the fallen logs, stepped a tall figure clad in scratched and dented armor. On his breastplate was a sigil, a hawk in flight. He wore no helm, revealing dark hair streaked with gray and a scar that ran from temple to jawline. His eyes, pale green, burned with a fury I recognized at once, some mix of righteous vengeance and desperate resolve. He pointed his longsword at me, shouting to his men, "Take the silver-haired witch. Kill the rest." A wave of rebels surged forward at his command, brandishing weapons with grim determination. Our cavalry lines were scattered, though we still outnumbered them slightly. The tall man and I locked eyes. I swung from my horse, dismounting to meet him on more even ground, motioning for Andrus and the others to hold the flanks. The mud sucked at my boots as I advanced. Arrows hissed overhead. Rain trickled down the back of my neck. The tall man sneered, leveling his sword. "Valyrian," he spat. "You've no place here. This land belongs to its true lords." I felt a surge of anger that manifested in my every muscle. The illusions of civility were stripped away. Here was a foe who believed we were foreign tyrants and who would slaughter anyone wearing the dragon banner. I would show him how deep Valyria's power ran. "We are the true lords now," I said. My voice echoed with the steel in my hand. "Stand down or face the consequences." He lunged without warning, swinging in a wide arc. I met his blade with a parry. The clash of steel reverberated through my arms and I nearly slipped on the wet leaves. He was skilled, likely an anointed knight from centuries-old traditions and stronger than me physically. But I had speed on my side. I pivoted, allowing his sword to glance off my pauldron. The blow numbed my shoulder further and I bit back a cry. In response, I twisted my wrist and slashed at his side. He spun away just in time, leaving me to catch only the edge of his cuirass. I heard it scrape. We circled each other in the mud, both breathing hard. The world beyond our immediate duel was chaos, my men fighting pockets of rebels, the drake screeching overhead. Every now and then a burst of flame illuminated the canopy as Saran tried to flush out archers. Through it all, I focused on the tall man's stance, the slight limp in his left leg, the anger fueling every strike. He roared and came at me with a downward chop. I sidestepped, hooking his sword arm with my own blade. Sparks flew as Valyrian steel met lesser metal and I twisted, forcing his weapon free from his grip. It clattered into the mud. Seizing the moment, I pressed the tip of my sword to his throat. He froze, breathing heavily, droplets of rain coursing down his scarred face. I expected him to beg or perhaps surrender, but his eyes flashed defiantly. "The day will come," he growled, voice hoarse, "when your dragons turn to dust and your throne of lies collapses. We will not bow forever." He spat at my feet. Without waiting for me to answer, he lunged with his bare hands, trying to force my sword aside and tackle me. But I anticipated the movement, stepping back just enough to maintain pressure with my blade. His own momentum drove him against the sharp steel. He gasped as blood spilled from the wound in his throat, staining his battered armor. Then he collapsed at my feet. It was over in a heartbeat. I stared down at him, breath ragged, sword dripping, uncertain if I should feel triumph or sorrow. In that moment, I realized he was only a symbol of something larger, unbridled hatred for Valyria, resentment from those who recalled the days before we arrived, or simply men who refused to bend the knee. Behind me, a few rebels dropped their weapons, seeing their leader fall. Others fought to the bitter end, forcing our men to cut them down. By the time the skirmish ended, several of my soldiers lay wounded or dead, and nearly all of the rebels were slain or captured. We took the survivors under guard, binding their wrists with leather cords. Some glared at us with undimmed rage. Others hung their heads, terrified, clinging to life. The tall man's body lay in the mud, his eyes open to the weeping sky. Andrus approached me, sword in hand. "Your orders, my lady?" I looked around at the wounded and the dead, the swirling, rain-soaked gloom of the forest. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to remain steady. "We returned to Orian's Crest. Take the prisoners. Let them face proper judgment. We'll glean whatever information we can from them about their supporters and suppliers." Andrus nodded. His face was grim. We had a few men who specialized in extracting secrets, and none were particularly gentle. But this was how it had to be done. The freehold allowed no illusions. Controlling an empire this vast required methods that made lesser rulers balk. Behind me, one of the Westerosi knights used a torn banner to stanch a comrade's bleeding. I sheathed my sword, and in that moment I felt the sting of my shoulder wound more keenly. My armor was dented, my cloak soaked through. Perhaps this was the cost of forging my own name in a land that hated the banner I served. My father had warned me, we Valyrians inherited more than just dragons and steel. We also inherited the grudges of every people we conquered. We emerged from the forest by nightfall, grateful for the open sky, though it remained choked with storm clouds. Orion's crest beckoned us with the promise of shelter and warmth. The road back was slow. We had to lead or carry the prisoners, treat the wounded, maintain constant vigilance. The small drake circled overhead, an ever-watchful sentinel. I wanted a true dragon with colossal wings and scorching breath to incinerate any rebel camp in one sweep. But I had to remind myself that power was not a toy to be used carelessly. This was a conquest as much about hearts as about land. We had to show that Valyria was a force of order, not just wanton destruction. Any province governed purely by terror eventually cracked apart. My father's entire career was built on balancing fear and justice. Tonight, I wondered if such balance was truly possible. When we finally crested the hill leading to Orion's massive gates, torches flickered along the walls, casting a welcoming glow across the dark. We filed inside, bedraggled, exhausted, caked in mud and blood. The fortress guards took the prisoners to the dungeon, ignoring their curses. Attendants rushed to help the wounded, and stable hands led away the horses. I dismounted, wincing at the stiffness in my limbs, and turned to Andrus. Set up watchers tonight, in case there are any more lurking rebels. And see that we're prepared to question the prisoners at first light. He bowed. Yes, my lady. Then his stern features softened slightly as he noted the blood seeping from beneath my shoulder guard. Have the healers see to your wound. You've earned some rest. I nodded and trudged up the steps to the keep, feeling as though every bit of me weighed 1,000 pounds. Servants ushered me into my chambers, and a stern-faced healer was summoned. She removed my armor piece by piece, pausing with gentle fingers over the gash in my shoulder. An arrow grazed you, she said, prodding carefully. No splinters left inside. But it's deep enough to cause you trouble. I'll clean it and apply a salve. I barely grunted in acknowledgement, my mind drifting. She worked quickly, and the stinging of antiseptic herbs brought tears to my eyes. I forced them back, refusing to show weakness even here. When she finished, she bandaged my shoulder with precise efficiency. Try not to move too much, she advised. I'll give you milk of the poppy if the pain grows too great. I shook my head. I wanted a clear mind for tomorrow. Pain, though unwelcome, would keep me sharp. After the healer departed, I sank onto the edge of my bed, ignoring the plush covers in favor of a few moments alone with my racing thoughts. An oil lamp flickered, casting shifting shadows on the walls. Outside, the wind hissed, and the roar of the sea could be faintly heard through the windows. Part of me longed to hide under the blankets and forget this day. But I was no child. I was Deneira Maegor, daughter of Valyria, entrusted with maintaining order in this corner of the empire. This was the reality of conquest. Sleep came in fitful bursts, haunted by images of twisted trees, masked archers, and the tall man's final glare. When morning arrived, I rose before the sun, dressing in a fresh tunic and a simpler breastplate, mindful of my bandaged shoulder. In the courtyard, the rain had paused, but a blanket of mist clung to the ground. Soldiers were already stirring, carrying out their assigned duties. Through a side gate, I saw men removing the bodies of those who had died of their wounds overnight, preparing them for burial or pyres. The stench of death seemed to linger in the cold air. I made my way to the dungeons. They were located beneath the fortress, carved into the basalt foundation itself. Torches lined the damp walls, and the corridors echoed with dripping water. A rank odor of mildew and stale sweat hung in the air. The jailer, a hulking man with a scar over his lip, bowed upon seeing me. The prisoners are here, my lady. We have a few from yesterday's skirmish. 2 are already dead of their wounds. That leaves 4 to question. Behind him, Andrew stood with arms crossed. I inclined my head. I want to speak with them. We need to find out who is feeding them, where they're hiding, and whether any lords of these lands are secretly aiding them. Andrus nodded. We've done some preliminary questioning. They're reluctant to talk. His mouth curved into a grim line. We have other methods we can employ if you permit it. I hesitated. Interrogation by force was not new to me, nor to the Valyrians in general. But it was never pleasant. My father had said that fear was a tool best used sparingly. Overuse dulled its edge and corroded one's spirit. Yet we could not let these rebels thrive. Lives were at stake, along with Valyria's authority. I steeled myself. Use only what's necessary. No pointless cruelty. We need information, not vengeance. He bowed in acquiescence and gestured for the jailer to bring forth the first captive. A man in his 30s, with shoulders like an ox and a broken nose, was dragged into the torchlight. His hair was matted and his eyes flashed with defiance. Blood had dried on the side of his face from a scalp wound not fully tended. When he saw me, he spat, and the jailer struck him in the gut. He doubled over with a grunt. Name, Andrus demanded. The man glowered. Laurent. Laurent, I said, keeping my voice level. You've killed men under my charge, stolen goods meant for the freehold. Do you understand the penalty for treason against Valyria? He did not answer immediately, but the muscle in his jaw twitched. I stepped closer. I am Deniramager, and it is within my power to sentence you to death or spare you. Depends on what I learn. My voice was cold, but I tried not to sound overly cruel. I studied his face, searching for cracks in his bravado. Your leader is dead. You have nothing to gain by protecting the Greyhawks anymore. His nostrils flared. You think I fight for gold or some petty cause? I fight because your kind took everything from us. Our kings, our traditions burned away by your damned dragons. He coughed, and a fleck of blood touched his lip. Kill me if you want. Others will rise. You'll never break our spirit. I took a deep breath. Here was the crux of the problem. They saw themselves as freedom fighters, not bandits. The tall man's hatred lived on in them. Speak or remain silent, I said, but know this, more will die if you refuse to help us end this without further bloodshed. Where's your camp? He glared, refusing to speak. I signaled to Andrus. In short order, the man was taken to a side chamber. I did not stay to witness what transpired. I had given Andrus my orders, no pointless cruelty, but I knew the methods used would be unpleasant. Some time passed as I paced the corridor, my heart heavy. The jailer brought the next prisoner, an older man, wiry, with graying stubble on his cheeks. He looked more frightened than the first. His eyes flitted around, never settling on mine for more than a moment. The same questions were asked. He mumbled incoherently at first, muttering curses about dragons. But after Andrus laid a mailed fist across his jaw and a guard threatened him with the tip of a blade, he whimpered and spoke. They had a camp in the hills near the ruins of an old watchtower from the days when the Ironborn once raided these coasts. The Greyhawks had allies in some nearby villages, receiving food, hides, even the occasional blacksmithing service to fix their weapons. There were rumors that at least one minor lord funneled them coin to keep their cause alive. He did not know which lord, but it was someone with enough influence to shield them from too much scrutiny. My pulse quickened. This was what I needed to hear. The other two prisoners shared similar stories. All claimed ignorance about the identity of their noble benefactor, but the older man admitted their leader had come into a fair bit of gold recently. Enough to buy horses, new swords, maybe even bribe local officials to turn a blind eye. He described a messenger who had arrived on horseback wearing a dark cloak, delivering coin every fortnight. They were told only that it came from the Hawk across the sea, some code name that might point to an ally in the Iron Islands or beyond. The puzzle was far from solved, but it was a start. We now had a location for their camp and a hint of higher conspirators. I dismissed the prisoners, ordering that they be placed under guard until final sentencing. With their confessions on record, they would be put to death eventually unless my father arrived and chose otherwise. But we needed to finish the job they started. The Greyhawks would not vanish just because we destroyed one small band. The region had to be cleansed of rebellious cells, or this would repeat endlessly. My mind churned with possibilities. Could a local Westerosi house, like Baldwin's or another sworn to us, be covertly fueling the rebels? Or was someone from the Iron Islands plotting to drive out Valyria? In any case, I would root them out. That was my charge. Andrus and I convened in the war room soon after, a circular chamber dominated by a large table bearing a map of the western shores. Flickering torches cast shifting shadows on the walls lined with tall shelves of scrolls. We placed markers on the newly discovered camp location in the hills. If these rebels are as numerous as rumored, we'll need more than a token force, he said, running a hand over the close-shaven sides of his head. We should request reinforcements from King's Landing or even Dragonstone. A true war dragon would scatter them easily. I tapped my finger on the map, furrowing my brow. That's one approach, I conceded. But a large force will take time to arrive. And we risk the rebels slipping away if they realize we are moving in great numbers. The hills are vast. If they scatter, it becomes a game of cat and mouse again. He grunted in agreement. True. A smaller, swift force might be best. Strike before they can run or send word to allies. But we must be certain we can win. We saw how dangerous they can be in an ambush, I reminded him, unable to repress a wince as I shifted my bandaged shoulder. Surprise is key. So we formed a plan, assemble a company of proven soldiers, both Valyrian and Westerosi knights, and a few Drake riders, enough to handle archers and scouts from the air. We would march within 2 days, giving us time to glean more intelligence from local informants. Then we would strike the camp at dawn, catching them off guard. If we destroyed their hideout, the Greyhawks would be forced to regroup elsewhere, hopefully giving us a chance to track them or unravel their network. In an ideal scenario, we might even lure out the mysterious benefactor. 2 days flew by in a flurry of preparations. My healers insisted I rest my shoulder, but I also spent hours training to ensure I could fight at full strength. We gathered supplies, cured meats, hardtack, flasks of water, torches, rope, and extra bowstrings for the archers. I also discreetly sent one of my attendants to Lord Baldwin, inviting him to meet me at Orian's Crest before our expedition. He arrived promptly wearing a subdued smile that I found suspicious. In my private solar, I offered him wine and explained that I would be undertaking a campaign against the Greyhawks. I paid close attention to his reaction. He feigned concern, nodding as though he fully supported the plan. Yet I sensed something in his manner, perhaps a flicker of wariness or annoyance. He peppered me with questions. Where do you believe they're hiding? How many men will you bring? How far west do you intend to go? I answered in vague terms, ensuring I did not reveal specifics. All the while, I studied the flicker in his eyes, the way his hand occasionally tensed on the goblet. He seemed far too interested. When we parted, I felt no closer to proving he was complicit, but my suspicion remained. I had put him on notice, at least, that I was vigilant. If he was truly involved, perhaps he would slip up. In the meantime, I could not afford to let personal suspicion stall a necessary campaign. With all in readiness, I set out with a company of 50 men, 30 cavalry, 10-foot soldiers specialized in infiltration, and 10 archers. 2 Drake riders accompanied us, including Saran. The morning sky was clear, for once, the sun emerging above the basalt fortress walls. A crisp wind tugged at the banners. I left Andrus in charge of Orian's Crest, instructing him to keep watch for suspicious activity among the local lords. Then, leading the column, I guided us down the coastal road and inland, determined to crush the Greyhawks at their source. The march was long but not without purpose. Saran's Drake scouted overhead, occasionally circling back to report. We encountered no direct resistance the first day. By dusk, we were well beyond the ambush site and pressing deeper into unfamiliar terrain. We made camp in a clearing near a meandering stream, posting sentries and letting the horses rest. In the distance, a ridge of mist-shrouded hills rose ominously against the twilight sky. Somewhere among them waited the rebels' stronghold. Despite the day's calm, nerves were on edge. Some of my Westerosi knights muttered about ill omens, wolf howls in the distance, a half-moon hanging oddly in the sky. I dismissed their superstition but understood their anxiety. This was no staged battle. The Greyhawks would fight like cornered beasts. That night, I struggled to sleep, haunted by the memory of the tall man's dying glare. Rain pattered on the canvas of my tent. I listened to it for a long while, trying to quell the churn of my thoughts. Eventually, exhaustion claimed me. The dawn came, gray and cold, with the promise of bloodshed. We broke camp quietly, the men moving with practiced efficiency. Soon we were ascending narrow trails into the hills. The air grew colder and the trees grew sparse, replaced by shrubs and rocky outcroppings. We found a vantage point that allowed Saran's Drake to circle. Around midday, she returned to report a partial sighting of smoke from a crumbling tower half a league away. That was likely our target. We approached with extreme caution. I ordered silence among the ranks, no loud chatter or trumpets. We left the horses tied to a thicket beyond a bend, taking only half the men forward on foot. The rest would remain behind, hidden, ready to charge if needed. The hills made for tricky navigation, with jagged rocks that could slip underfoot. Clouds drifted overhead, occasionally casting gloom. My heart pounded as we inched forward. I felt every muscle tense, scanning the horizon for a sign of watchers or sentries. This time, we wanted to be the ones launching the ambush. Eventually, we saw it, the ruins of an old watchtower perched on a slight rise of stone. Most of its upper levels had collapsed, leaving a jagged stump of cracked masonry. Around it, scattered huts or tents were visible, forming a crude encampment. Smoke rose from a few fires. Even from here, I caught the smell of cooking meat. Figures moved among the dwellings, perhaps a few dozen. My men eyed me, waiting for the signal. We were out of bow range for now. Saran and the other Drake rider hovered in the sky, prepared to dive. A part of me wished for a mighty war dragon, the kind that could belch flame to engulf the entire camp in one pass. But that was not my fate today. Today, I would lead from the ground. I motioned for the archers to fan out, each man finding a vantage behind rocks or scraggly trees. Then I signaled for a slow advance. We crept forward, our boots quiet on the rocky earth. The wind carried faint voices from the camp, laughter, casual talk. They had not detected us. Yet, my plan was to get as close as possible, then have Saran dive with her Drake, unleashing a blast of fire to sow confusion. We would charge in the ensuing chaos, cutting down the rebels or forcing them to surrender. With any luck, we might take more prisoners and learn the identity of their benefactor. But luck can be fickle, especially in war. As we were within a stone's throw of optimum range, a call rang out from the tower ruins, a warning voice. Perhaps we had been spotted by a sentry hidden among the rubble. Instantly, the camp stirred. Men grabbed weapons. Shouts erupted. I hissed a command, "Archers, fire." A volley of arrows arced through the air, striking tents and men alike. Screams followed. Then came the whoosh of wings overhead as Saran's drake descended, spewing flame on the wooden huts. A searing wave of heat and smoke washed over the hillside, setting canvas and timber ablaze. Figures ran, ablaze, howling in terror. Without hesitation, I led the charge. My soldiers emerged from cover, swords and spears glinting in the sun. We rushed the camp's perimeter, storming over a crude fence made from sharpened stakes. The rebels fought back fiercely, some loosing arrows, others brandishing axes or spears. A chaotic melee ensued. I found myself clashing swords with a red-bearded rebel who spat curses in the old tongue of these lands. My bandaged shoulder protested each time I swung, but adrenaline dulled the pain. We hammered at each other until I saw an opening and thrust my blade into his torso. He collapsed with a ragged cry. Another rushed me from the side, only to be intercepted by one of my knights, whose sword cleaved the man's helm. All around, the shrieks of men and the roar of flames blended into a cacophony that rattled my skull. Saran's drake soared overhead, occasionally diving to spout gouts of flame, though it had to be careful not to incinerate our own troops. Smoke choked the air, stinging my eyes. The hillside was a swirl of flickering orange and gray. In the swirl, I glimpsed women and children fleeing from tents, perhaps the families of these rebels. I cursed under my breath. Civilian casualties were inevitable in this environment, but I had hoped to avoid them if possible. A group of rebels rallied near the tower's base, forming a tight knot of resistance. They had shortbows and crossbows, unleashing a barrage of bolts that knocked several of my men off their feet. One arrow clanged off my cuirass, another grazed my leg. I grit my teeth and pressed forward with half a dozen knights. We clambered over rubble, using fallen stones as partial cover. When I was close enough, I vaulted a broken wall and slammed my blade into a crossbowman's ribs. He toppled, gasping. Another tried to stab me with a spear, but one of my archers shot him in the throat from behind me. The tower's entrance yawned, a dark hole partially blocked by debris. Figures vanished inside. "Clear it!" I yelled, waving men forward. A pair of knights heaved aside the fallen timbers blocking the doorway, revealing a cramped interior swirling with dust. Torchlight flickered from somewhere within. I led the way in, ducking under low-hanging beams. Inside was a tangle of collapsed staircases and crumbling walls. Shadows danced across the rubble-strewn floor. My senses flared, half expecting an ambush. Then I heard voices, shouts of alarm from deeper within the tower's husk. I advanced carefully, sword raised, while behind me a knight carried a torch. We found a narrow passage leading to what might once have been a cellar or storage room. The stench of damp earth and mold assaulted my nostrils. In the flickering light, I saw them. Half a dozen rebels cowering behind a toppled stone slab. Some clutched weapons, others were unarmed. One woman raised a dagger in shaking hands. "Stay back," she screamed, tears streaking her soot-smeared cheeks. Another older man brandished a sword with trembling defiance. "We will not yield," he cried, voice cracking. I hesitated, my chest heaving with exertion. These were not hardened knights. They looked more like villagers forced by desperation into this fight. For all my training in the ruthless ways of conquest, I felt a pang of pity. They wanted to drive out Valyria, but they were outmatched. I could see the fear in their eyes. One of my knights sneered, stepping forward to skewer the woman, but I held up a hand. "Disarm," I commanded, my voice echoing in the cramped space. "Lay down your weapons and you will not be harmed." They glanced at each other, uncertain. Outside, the sounds of battle were fading. I suspected my men had secured most of the camp by now. Smoke wafted in, stinging my throat. The older man's grip on his sword wavered, but he did not lower it. "Why should we trust you?" he demanded. "Valyrians break their word. You burn our homes. You kill us." "This is war," I said, more quietly, struggling to keep a steady tone. "But I do not want to slaughter those who surrender. Lay down your weapons and I'll see you treated as prisoners. Fight, and you die right here." He looked at the woman, at the others, and then at my knights, Valyrian steel glinting in the torchlight. With a trembling sigh, he let the sword slip from his grasp. The woman stared at him, eyes brimming with tears, then hurled the dagger aside. The rest followed suit, the clatter of metal echoing. Relieved, I ordered my knights to tie them up, instructing them not to harm them further. We shepherded them out of the tower, back into the smoky daylight. Outside, the fighting was all but over. The last pockets of rebels had been dispatched or captured. Bodies littered the ground, some half-burned. The huts were charred husks. The stench of death hung thick. My men saluted me as I emerged. The camp is taken, Lady Deneira, a knight reported. Many have fled into the hills, but we'll track them if you wish. We've captured about 24. I surveyed the scene. Some of my men were wounded, one lay motionless, an arrow through his throat. Another clutched his abdomen. Several more had minor cuts and bruises. We had paid a price, but the rebels were broken here. Saran landed with her drake, the beast's flanks heaving, streaked with soot. They scattered in all directions, she said. We can chase them down if we move quickly. I weighed the decision. We were tired and the terrain favored them if they decided to keep running. A part of me wanted to crush any possibility of them regrouping. Another part recognized that we had inflicted a severe blow. Their main camp, presumably their largest concentration of fighters, was destroyed. Mopping up the stragglers might take days, if not weeks. And we still needed to unravel who had funded them. That might be more critical than chasing every last rebel through these hills. Send out patrols, I said, but don't push too far from our main force. Prioritize capturing or eliminating any group that still poses a threat. Saran nodded and relayed the orders. Meanwhile, the rest of us gathered the prisoners. We found a makeshift storehouse with stolen goods from caravans, crates of Valyrian coins, dried food, even a few barrels of black powder used for mining. It was a revealing haul, enough to suggest that they had external support. Could local villagers supply them with so much? Possibly. A black powder was more specialized, often shipped in from the east. This entire arrangement felt bigger than the handful of rebels we'd slain. As the day wore on, we secured the area, burying our dead, dragging rebel corpses into a mass grave. My men rummaged through tents, the tower ruins, searching for letters or ledgers. Some found parchments with coded markings, others discovered ravens caged for messages. By nightfall, we had quite a trove of leads. The next step was to piece them together. With the camp taken, we decided to spend the night on this ground, though the smell of burnt wood and flesh was inescapable. We posted sentries around the perimeter, using the tower's partial walls for shelter. I felt numb, drained from the killing. The rebel corpses and charred ruins were a stark reminder of how quickly war turned a place to ashes. Yet in the eyes of my men, it was a victory, a blow against defiance that would discourage others. That evening, I took a moment to walk among the tents, ignoring the stench and the bustle, letting the grim reality settle into my bones. I was a Valyrian, an inheritor of the greatest empire in the known world, and this was how we maintained our power. Through blood and fire. Some would say it was destiny. Others would call it tyranny. I wasn't entirely sure what I believed. But I knew my duty. As I inspected a makeshift table where a few stolen parchments were strewn, I found a scrap of paper bearing a stylized hawk sigil stamped in red wax, with the words, "The hawk across the sea provides." The script was refined, not the scrawl of a common soldier. It sent a jolt through me. There was indeed someone behind this. I recalled Lord Baldwin's prying questions, the possibility of an Iron Islander link, the hush of certain coastal lords when asked about rebel sightings. I resolved that once I returned to Orian's Crest, I would delve deeper into these leads. Someone was conspiring to stoke these flames of rebellion, hoping to cast Valyria out. Later, by the light of a campfire, I read through the coded letters we had gathered. They were full of references to shipments, schedules, and cryptic mentions of a great hawk. One letter even promised more gold once the third caravan is taken. My throat tightened. This had to be a deliberate sabotage of Valyrian supply lines. And where was this gold coming from if not a wealthy sponsor with a grudge? We rose early the next day, cold and stiff. The drake soared overhead as we prepared to move out. I assigned a small detachment to remain behind, securing the area while I led the majority and the prisoners back to Orian's Crest. The journey was slow and difficult with a train of captives and wounded men. I knew that upon returning we would face the next phase, interrogations, political maneuvering, and further hunts for rebel cells. But as we trudged down from the hills, I glanced at the horizon where the sea glimmered under a pale morning sun. Old Valyria had never fallen, and we, its children, now ruled Westeros by Dragonfire. That was our gift and our burden. Even centuries later, the land resisted us in pockets. I wondered if it would always be so. Yet, as I gazed at the lines of men trudging behind me, battered but alive, I felt a kind of fierce pride surge in my heart. We had fought, bled, and triumphed together. They called me lady, but in battle I was simply another blade in the swirl of chaos. The rebels had tasted our steel and flame, and many had perished for their defiance. For the moment, I was content to march home victorious, knowing that I had done what was necessary to maintain the order and prosperity that Valyria promised. The rebellious spirit in Westeros might never die completely, but with each victory we kept that spirit in check, forging a future that was shaped not by ancient local kings, but by the unbroken might of the freehold across the sea. The next leg of my story would be about unraveling the conspiracy behind these Greyhawks, about discovering which lords or factions sought to undermine our rule. But that was for tomorrow. For now, I needed to return safely with my men, bury our dead with honor, and assure the realm that the Empire remained strong. Let the hawks cry in the night, let them whisper of old freedom and the day Valyria might falter, but so long as dragons soared in our skies, we remained unbowed. And I, Daenerys Maegor, would prove worthy of that legacy no matter the cost. I returned to Orian's Crest with my soldiers and the captured rebels in a grim procession. The road felt longer than before, each of us weighed down by the lingering stench of smoke and death. The sky darkened to a bruised purple over the western sea, and gulls screeched along the cliffs, flying low to scavenge what bits they could from the baggage train or from the wounded horses. My men were exhausted. We had marched through half the day after the skirmish at the tower. Some limp-walked, leaning on their comrades' wounds hastily bandaged. The rebels we'd taken prisoner stumbled behind them, wrists bound, eyes full of fear and anger. The hills stretched behind us, a charred scar marking the place where we had uprooted one more pocket of defiance. By dusk, the fortress gates loomed into view, carved from black basalt and reinforced with iron. I had never been so glad to see this austere place. Sentinels on the walls lit torches that glowed like scattered fireflies, guiding us into the courtyard. We were greeted by Andros, stoic as ever, who inclined his head in relief. Servants rushed forward to assist the wounded, and the stable hands took our weary mounts. Prisoners were herded to the dungeons. Those who could walk under their own power were half-dragged by the jailer's men, while others, too badly hurt to stand, were carried on makeshift litters. A few defied us to the last, shouting curses or spitting at the ground, but they were quickly silenced by a sharpened elbow or the crack of a gauntlet fist. Saran guided her smoke-streaked drake into the courtyard, allowing it to settle on the southern battlement. The creature hissed wearily, wings drooping after the long flight. She seemed just as drained, sliding off its back with a halting step. "That's the last time I'll underestimate them," she muttered, wiping sweat from her brow and grimacing at the sight of blood staining the edges of her gloves. I touched her arm gently and thanked her for her bravery in the fight. Word of our success spread fast. Some of the officers gathered under the arches to congratulate us, speaking in hushed voices of how the Greyhawks' main stronghold had been destroyed. When I entered the main hall, I dismissed the crowd that tried to form around me and asked only for water, some bread, and enough time to take off my mail. My shoulders throbbed more fiercely than ever, and each breath drew a dull ache from the wound on my upper arm. Soot and dried gore clung to my armor. All I craved was to cleanse myself and rest, but I knew I could not yet. With a weariness that came from both body and mind, I joined Andros at the top of the keep. A narrow chamber served as his office and war room. A single brazier cast dancing light on the bare stone walls. Andros had removed his helmet and gloves. He stood by a long table where fresh maps were spread. Two wide windows overlooked the sea, which churned under a moonless sky. The sound of wind whistled through tiny gaps in the shutters. He gave me a brief nod. "Welcome back, my lady," he said quietly. "Your victory's the talk of the fortress. I'm told many bandits either died or are in our cells now." "Well done." I exhaled. "A hard-fought victory. The tower camp is in ashes. But I worry it's only one piece of a larger puzzle." "Agreed," he said. "While you were gone, I've discreetly questioned a few locals about the possibility of any lords feeding gold to these rebels. Most said nothing. Some insisted no lord would dare. But I have my doubts." He motioned toward the parchment on the table. "We've compiled intelligence on the local houses, including your friend Baldwin's estate. His finances are interesting." I watched him trace a finger along a ledger. "He pays taxes regularly but invests heavily in shipping ventures between Lannisport and the Iron Islands. There's nothing illegal about that, but it places him in contact with certain Ironborn traitors." He tapped the parchment again. "It is said that House Hoare's descendants, or other ambitious Ironborn lines, might still harbor dreams of reclaiming the lands lost to Valyria. They have coin from raiding and sea trade. Perhaps one is allied with the Greyhawks." I recalled the coded messages we found among the rebels' belongings. References to the hawk across the sea, shipments, promises of more gold. Something about that phrase echoed in my mind. We'll have to be certain. The Iron Islands might be part of this, but we shouldn't overlook local sponsors either. Let's not forget Lord Baldwin's suspicious inquiries before I left. Andros stood straighter. "We can question him, but we must tread carefully. Accusing a local lord without strong proof could incite more unrest. I looked at the map, the lines of coastline and the ragged shape of the western shores. My father had entrusted me to keep order here, and if a Westerosi lord was secretly fueling these insurrections, it would be a deeper betrayal than any small band of outlaws. I'll speak with the new prisoners. The ones from the tower. We seized documents, fragments of letters. Some of them might have recognized the messenger who brought that gold. He nodded. I'll make the arrangements. For now, you should rest. You're wounded and we can't risk infection. I wanted to protest, but the throbbing in my shoulder was relentless. I'll take a few hours, I relented, turning to leave. Then I'll start questioning them. I made my way through dim corridors to my private chambers. Servants hurried to pour hot water into a wide copper basin. Steam curled upward and I forced myself to strip off the crusted armor. My tunic underneath was stiff with dried blood and soot. The smell of old sweat, scorched fabric, and death made me close my eyes against a wave of nausea. Slowly, carefully, I cleaned the dried gore from my hands and face, trying not to aggravate the bandage on my shoulder. The warm water brought sharp stings of pain wherever there were cuts or scrapes, but at least it washed away the worst of the filth. A female attendant with close-cropped hair entered, carrying fresh salves. She introduced herself as Helena, one of the fortress's healers. Her voice was calm, though she looked at me with concern. You've been pushing yourself too hard, my lady. The arrow wound at your shoulder has begun to inflame, and these new scrapes don't help. She helped ease the bandage off to reveal angry red tissue. Her careful fingers probed around it, and I stiffened in pain. Hold still, she murmured, applying a pungent poultice of crushed herbs and honey. I clenched my jaw, tasting blood from biting the inside of my cheek. We can't let this go untreated or risk blood poisoning. You must keep this clean and rest your arm for several days. Days? I echoed, sweat beating at my temples. I have rebels to question, a region to pacify. Your duties won't matter if you die of fever, she replied matter-of-factly, winding a fresh cloth around my shoulder. At least promise me you'll stay out of armor for a while. If the wound tears open again, it'll be worse. I'll do what I must, I said, avoiding a direct promise. But thank you. Helena left, and I sat on the bed, the day's exhaustion pressing down with the weight of a millstone. Outside, the fortress settled into an uneasy quiet. The walls still murmured with the presence of many men, the swirl of rumors, and the intangible tension of a land under occupation. I pressed my hand over the bandaged spot. Each throb reminded me how delicate the boundary was between life and death, between pride and ruin. I might be a Dragonlord's daughter, but a single blade or fever could bring me low. Despite my swirling thoughts, sleep overtook me at last. When I awoke, it was the dead of night, judging by the darkness at the window. My muscles ached, but I felt a bit more stable. I drank from a clay pitcher set on a side table, letting the water cool my parched throat. A single lamp burned low, casting dim shadows on the walls. I stood, ignoring the protest of my injuries, and pulled on a simple linen tunic. Outside my door, the corridor was quiet except for a pair of guards in half-plate leaning on long spears. They bowed as I emerged. My lady, do you need anything? I want to see the new prisoners. The ones we took at the tower, I said. Bring a lantern. The guard on the left hesitated. I'm sure the castellan would advise waiting until morning. I'm awake now, I replied in a tone that brooked no argument. Have me escorted. That's all. The guard complied, rummaging for a hooded lantern from a nearby alcove. Then they guided me through the fortress's corridors, down 2 flights of stairs to the dungeons. Torches flickered in iron sconces, each pool of light revealing more of the stone passages carved from the basalt. The air was stale, thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and mildew. Our footsteps echoed across the damp floors. 2 jailers stood on watch by the main door, hulking men with ring mail and cudgels. They perked up when they recognized me, though they tried to hide their surprise. My lady once said, pulling a ring of keys from his belt. You're here about the new prisoners? Most are in a communal cell, the more dangerous ones in separate cells. The ones too wounded to walk are locked in the infirmary chamber. I nodded. Take me to the communal cell first. I'd like to speak with them. I paused, glancing at the second jailer. Only open the door once I'm inside. You two remain outside unless I call you. Yes, my lady, they said in unison. They led me deeper into the bowels of the dungeons, past rows of iron-barred cells. Muffled cries and moans emanated from behind locked doors, along with the occasional rasp of metal scraping stone. I kept my chin high, reminding myself that fear was a weapon I, too, could wield if necessary. The guards halted before a heavy wooden door reinforced with bands of steel. With a grunt, one jailer lifted the locking bar and swung the door open. A gust of stale, sour-smelling air billowed out. I stepped inside with the lantern. The room was cramped, with straw scattered across the floor, now fouled by filth. A row of iron bars separated a walkway from the area where the prisoners huddled. About a dozen men and women, those we had deemed less formidable, were packed together. Some sat listlessly, staring at the ground. Others glared the moment they recognized the silver hair that marked me as Valyrian. I could almost taste their loathing. I took a slow breath. I am Daenerys Maegor, I said, loud enough to echo off the stone walls. You know who I am. You know why you're here. My voice was low but resonant. You fought against the Freehold. You killed men under my command. And yet, if you speak honestly, there may be mercy. Silence reigned. A few of them muttered curses, one spat on the floor. The straw rustled as they shifted. Their faces, illuminated by the dull glow of the lantern, showed exhaustion, bruises, and the hollow look of desperation. I stepped closer to the bars, my own injury pulsing with each heartbeat. Who was behind the gold shipments? Who brought you black powder and steel? One of the women, a middle-aged figure with greasy hair and a bruise swelling her right eye, pressed her lips together. We tell you nothing, even if we knew, she hissed. Your dragons brought ruin. You act like it's so unnatural we fight back. Of course we do. I stared at her, letting the hush stretch. Then I said, fight if you must, but do not pretend you can withstand our might for long. Look around you. Who stands now? Who is locked in a cell? Another prisoner, a younger man with a battered face, spoke up in a shaky voice. I only joined them for coin. I wasn't part of any big plan. They said we'd get paid if we raided caravans, that we'd be free from you Valyrians. Then who told you that? I asked pointedly. How did you get black powder or crossbows? That's not simple loot from a petty caravan. He shook his head, eyes flicking toward the older woman. Clearly, she outranked him in the rebel chain if they had such a thing. She cut in, the gold came from across the sea, that's all we know. Some black-cloaked bastard would show up at night, deliver the coin to our leader. Maybe to others too. We never saw his face. I lifted the lantern a fraction, letting its light reveal more of her features. And your leader was the man I killed in the forest ambush? The tall, scarred one? She grimaced. He was one among them. Many men have died wearing the hawk. But yes, he was in charge of that band. You think the fight ends with him? It doesn't. Others will rise. I tensed, reminding myself to keep calm. If you continue to shield your true benefactors, you'll die in these cells. Perhaps your families will, too. The Freehold is not gentle with traitors who cost it gold and lives. A flicker of anxiety crossed her face, but she masked it. She spat at the straw near her feet. Then kill us. That's all you Valyrians do. We have nothing more to say. My frustration mounted. I found myself fighting the urge to yank the door open and drag her out for a more painful interrogation. But I remembered my father's caution, fear and violence were effective only up to a point. There were times to offer a different route. Those of you with sense, I said, letting my voice carry over the group, understand that this cause is lost. If you wish for a chance to survive, give me names, places, any details. I will make a note of who cooperates when it comes time to pass sentence. Most of them kept their heads down, but I saw a few sideways glances. The younger man swallowed, looking torn as if he feared the older woman's wrath more than mine. My lady, he said in a near whisper, please, might I have a moment alone? I'll tell you some things. But not here. Not with them. The woman snarled, lunging across the straw, but a chain around her ankle jerked her short. Her fury was directed at him, not me. You turnlock dog, she rasped. We'll kill you ourselves, eh? Enough, I snapped, banging the lantern's metal edge against the bars. The clang startled them into stillness. I turned to the younger man. Guard, I called, and the door to the outer corridor creaked open. One of the jailers stepped in. Bring that one out, I ordered, pointing to him. The jailer nodded, keys rattling. The older woman cursed as they unchained the younger man and pulled him to his feet. He kept his eyes averted, trembling in a mix of fear and desperate hope. Once he was out and the door was locked again, I led him down the corridor to a side chamber. A single torch lit the space. The jailer shackled him to a heavy ring bolted in the floor, ensuring he could not bolt. Then the jailer withdrew a short distance, out of earshot but close enough to intervene if needed. I crouched in front of the prisoner, who smelled of sweat and old blood. "Speak now," I said in a measured tone. "Truthfully." He swallowed, glancing at the guard's looming shape in the door frame. Then he wet his lips and began. "We'd been raiding caravans for months, but we only got real supplies a few weeks back. Better swords, crossbows, even that black powder. It all came in crates marked with a crest, a black hawk over waves. But that's not any old Westerosi sigil I know, so maybe it's from across the sea. The coins we got were foreign. Not just Valyrian coins, but Myrish, Tyroshi, even Valentine pieces. I saw them once in a bag. Mixed currency, you see? Someone out there, someone big, is paying for this." I leaned closer. "You're certain it's no local lord?" He nodded fervently. Our band's main man, the tall one you slew, said it was a powerful ally in the Iron Islands or maybe even further east. But we also had help from a local, that's for sure. Could have been one of the lords around these parts, feeding info. We always knew which caravans were lightly guarded, which roads to strike. That knowledge had to come from someone high up. "Do you have a name? Clues? Something about the messenger?" He furrowed his brow. "Never heard a name. The messenger wore a black cloak lined with fur. He came twice at night. The second time he boasted that soon we'd have heavier weapons, that we'd be able to stand against you. He smelled of fancy perfume or cologne. That was weird for a Cell's word. I remember it because it stung my nose, some strong fragrance like cloves and oranges. That sparked my attention. Many wealthy lords or merchants used imported perfumes from Essos, and cloves with citrus were often from the Summer Isles or certain ports in the Free Cities. Could it be Baldwin or one of his associates? He did dabble in shipping. I pressed further. "You mentioned a local advantage. Did you hear talk about what house might be providing it?" He shook his head. "They didn't share that with the likes of me. But sometimes I saw our leader reading a note, something about Lord B, some name that started with B. Could be your Baldwin, or maybe another." He'd always burn the note after. I felt my pulse quicken. Baldwin was the likeliest suspect for a name starting with B, among the local lords at least. I stood, regarding the prisoner's trembling form. "If this information proves accurate, I'll ensure you have a fair hearing." "Thank you, my lady," he breathed, relief flickering in his eyes. "All I want is to live. I'm no great freedom fighter. I took the coin because my family was starving." I gave him a measured nod, signaled the guard, and left him shackled there for now. I needed to weigh how best to use his testimony. If I paraded him before Baldwin without firm proof, the cunning lord would simply deny everything, or label him a liar hoping to avoid the axe. But if I could gather more evidence, perhaps logs from Baldwin's shipping ventures, or a link to that Blackhawk crest, then I could confront him in a way he could not refute. At length, I returned to my chambers. My mind spun with new possibilities, and I realized that truly unraveling this would require more than force. It would require guile. Even if Baldwin was the culprit, he might have safeguards in place, hidden correspondences or collaborators in other houses. Confronting him too soon might only drive him into hiding, or prompt him to destroy the evidence. I did not sleep well that night. The next morning I rose early, ignoring the pain in my shoulder as best I could, and summoned Saran, Andrus, and a few trusted officers. In a small antechamber near the fortress library, I laid out what I had learned. They listened with rapt attention. Andrus rested both hands on the table, frowning. "If Baldwin is truly behind this, we can't just arrest him on suspicion alone. He's cunning, as you said, and well regarded by many local knights. Some might see him as a champion of Westerosi pride if we publicly accuse him." Saran's eyes narrowed. "Then we root him out quietly, gather proof. A letter with his seal, a witness to one of these midnight handoffs. Anything that ties him to the Greyhawks." One of the officers, a Valyrian named Othries, spoke up. "He's due to host a harvest feast in 3 days at his manor outside the coastal town of Embershade. Many local notables are invited, including some of our men. He extended an invitation to you as well, my lady." I turned the idea over in my head. "A feast," I said thoughtfully. "That might be an ideal chance to pry information from him, or to search his manor for suspicious ledgers. But it's risky. He'll be in his element, with plenty of watchers." Saran nodded. "And we'll be in the open. If he suspects anything, he might set a trap." "That's possible," I conceded. "But we can't pass up the opportunity. We'll accept his invitation. While we're there, we can do some discreet searching. And if it seems we won't find proof, at least we'll see who else is in his circle, who might join him in covert rebellion. Andros straightened. I'll select a small retinue of reliable soldiers to accompany you under the guise of ceremonial guards. They can stand watch while you, Saran, and a few others mingle. I inclined my head, then glanced at Othries. Inform Lord Baldwin that I accept his invitation and will attend with a handful of officers. Stress that we're grateful for his hospitality, especially after the turmoil of recent raids. Othries gave a faint smile. He won't suspect you're onto him if we phrase it that way. Exactly, I said. In the meantime, I'll question more of the prisoners for any link between Baldwin's name and the Blackhawk crest. Saran, see if your Drake can scout discreetly around Baldwin's estate in the coming days. If anything suspicious happens, shipments arriving at odd hours, armed men traveling in secret, let me know. We concluded the meeting with a renewed sense of direction. My father had always said that it was easy to crush a rebel army when it marched in the open, but more challenging to unmask the traitors who hid behind courtesy and gold. This would be my trial by intrigue as much as by fire. If I could outmaneuver Baldwin, assuming he was truly behind this, I would prove I was more than just a sword arm of Valyria. I would prove I could handle the cunning political games that kept an empire in place. Over the next 2 days, I prepared quietly. I interrogated 2 more rebels who had been separated from the others, gleaning repeated references to a mysterious lord whose name began with B, who seemed to have knowledge of caravan schedules. I did not push them too far. Some had injuries that needed healing to stay alive, or they'd be worthless. I also gleaned that the Blackhawk crest was not a recognized Westerosi house sigil, nor was it from any known Valyrian or Free City banner. It might be a unique mark used purely for smuggling or covert shipments. Either way, it suggested extensive planning and resources. Some of the letters I'd taken from the rebels' camp were indeed coded, and I asked our scribes to decode them, but so far only fragments made sense. References to the tide is turning, the hawk's flight, and the east wind. On the eve of the feast, I forced myself to rest, letting Helena apply fresh salve to my wound. She tooted at how stiff and puffy the skin had become and insisted on rewrapping it. I asked her to ensure I could still wear a formal gown suitable for a social event. She gave me a long, skeptical look. You're not meant to be dancing or raising a sword. She adjusted the wrappings so the bandage was as discreet as possible. Please be careful, my lady. I offered her a weary smile. I will be, though I doubted the day would remain peaceful. At dawn, we rode out. I wore a dark blue gown trimmed with subtle Valyrian motifs in silver thread. My hair was bound up, pinned by small dragon-shaped clasps. Even in times of strife, I had to present myself as a noble of rank and emissary of the freehold. Beneath the folds of my gown, a sheath was strapped to my thigh, holding a slender Valyrian steel dagger. I had no illusions about how quickly a feast could become a battlefield. Saran rode beside me, dressed in a simpler tunic and leggings, but with a short cloak that concealed her own weapons. She would pose as one of my ladies-in-waiting, though in truth she was my friend, scout, and potential bodyguard if things went awry. Andros led 6 cavalrymen, each clad in ceremonial half-plate bearing the dragon sigil of House Maegor. To onlookers, they might appear mere escorts. In truth, each man was hand-picked for loyalty and skill. We also had a single baggage cart bearing gifts for Baldwin, a cask of expensive Dornish wine and some Eastwatch pearls. Appearances had to be kept. It was a crisp, bright day. The sun glittered on the sea to our left as we followed the coastal road. Orion's crest shrank behind us, its black walls melding into the basalt cliffs. From time to time, we passed small hamlets. People emerged to watch us go by, gazes both curious and wary. The memory of the recent raids was fresh, the Greyhawks had sown fear. But even so, the sight of a Valyrian entourage with silver hair was no novelty after so many generations of our rule. Children waved timidly at us, only to be shushed by adults who eyed us with a mixture of respect and unease. By midday, we veered inland, riding past fields of wheat that had just been harvested. Stalks bristled in neat rows, gleaners trudging behind, bundling the last scraps. Eventually, we reached the outskirts of Embershade, the main town under Baldwin's domain. It sprawled along a gentle slope, with old stone buildings standing at the center and new timber structures expanding outward. Colorful pennants fluttered above market stalls, hinting at a modest prosperity. Baldwin's seat, a grand manor known as Oaken Shield Hall, rose beyond the town, perched on a low hill among stands of old oak trees. A squad of Baldwin's retainers met us at the town gate, each wearing livery of a stylized Oaken Shield. Their captain, a tall, lanky man with a trimmed gray beard, bowed graciously. "Welcome, Lady Daenerys, to Embershade," he said. "Lord Baldwin awaits you at Oaken Shield Hall. He's prepared a feast in your honor." I inclined my head, adopting a polite smile. "We appreciate his hospitality." The man beckoned us to follow him. Our horses clopped through winding streets, drawing stares from citizens. Some locals doffed caps in respect, others watched from stoops or behind windows. My eyes flicked around for any sign of unusual tension. But for the most part, I saw only typical daily bustle. Blacksmith smoke rising, carts hauling produce, fishmongers shouting prices. At the crest of a winding lane, Oaken Shield Hall came into full view, a sprawling structure of stone walls, wooden galleries, and tall windows. The oak motif repeated in carved pillars and beams, symbolizing the family's seat. Despite the name, it resembled more a castle manor hybrid than a simple hall, featuring a surrounding stone wall and a fortified gate. Banners rippled from the ramparts, and guards in Baldwin's colors stood at intervals. Though modest compared to Orian's Crest, it was still impressive by Westerosi standards. We entered the courtyard. Stable boys hurried forward to take our horses, while a steward ushered us inside. The interior boasted a polished stone floor, tapestry-hung walls, and wide windows letting in the autumn light. Servants flitted about carrying trays, candles, and pitchers of wine. I inhaled the scent of spiced bread and roast meats drifting from the kitchens. Music drifted faintly from deeper in the hall, where minstrels were tuning lutes. For all the outward cheer, I felt a knot tighten in my gut. Then Lord Baldwin himself appeared, descending a short flight of steps with open arms. He wore a rich doublet of deep brown velvet trimmed with gold thread. His thinning auburn hair was carefully combed, and a practiced smile curved his thin lips. "Lady Daenerys, what an honor to have you here again," he exclaimed, bowing. "My condolences for the trouble you've endured these recent weeks. These vile rebels, these outlaws. But I'm heartened you were able to restore peace to the roads." His greeting was cordial, lacking any sign of guilt. I forced a smile, stepping forward. "Thank you, Lord Baldwin. Your invitation was timely. After so much strife, it'll be good to share in the harvest festivities." Behind me, Saran and Andris observed in silence, guarded in their own expressions. Baldwin clapped his hands, beckoning a steward. "Come, let me show you to the guest quarters where you can refresh yourselves. The feast will begin soon. I've invited several local notables, House Farlin, House Woad, and a few others, plus some of your own Valyrian officers. A splendid gathering indeed." I dipped my head in polite gratitude. "You are most kind." As he guided us deeper into the manor, I paid close attention to his posture, his voice, searching for subtle signs of duplicity. His smile remained unwavering, his gestures wide and welcoming. If he was indeed the hidden backer of the Greyhawks, he wore his mask expertly. Servants led us down a corridor adorned with tapestries of local legends. Oak trees, knights, hunts. Eventually, we arrived at a suite of rooms set aside for my entourage. A modest receiving chamber, sleeping quarters, and a small antechamber for my personal attendants. I noted the thick oak doors, the narrow windows. If we needed to flee quickly, we'd have few options, but presumably this was no trap in the immediate sense. Once the servants bowed and left, I gathered Saran and Andris in the receiving chamber, lowering my voice. "We'll play along, attend the feast. Keep your eyes open for anything suspicious, guards or guests whispering in corners, coded remarks, references to hawks. If Baldwin tries to pry about the fortress or our next moves, steer the conversation away." "Understood." They nodded. Saran patted the hilt of the dagger hidden beneath her cloak. Andris flexed his gauntlet fists. His men would remain on standby, mingling around as though simply enjoying the feast, but all would be alert. It was a precarious dance. We needed to appear relaxed while scrutinizing every detail. Soon, a servant came to escort us to the main hall. We followed him through corridors bustling with guests and staff. At the entrance of the hall, we paused. Music swelled from within, a lively tune from flutes and a lute. The large chamber was laid with trestle tables in a horseshoe shape, leaving the center open for dancing or entertainment. Torches blazed in wall sconces and candelabers illuminated platters of roast boar, pheasant, spiced turnips, and fresh bread. Nobles and knights in fine attire mingled, sipping from goblets of dark wine or honey mead. Baldwin stood near the head table, greeting arrivals. When he saw me, he beamed and raised a goblet. "Lady Daenerys, come. Sit by me. We have the best seat for you." I approached with a gracious nod. Dozens of eyes followed me, some full of curiosity, others more guarded. A handful of Valyrian officers already present inclined their heads in respect. To their side, local lords and ladies in embroidered silks exchanged hushed remarks. I took the seat of honor on Baldwin's right. Saran sat further down while Andras and his men interspersed themselves tactfully. Servants bustled to pour wine and place fresh trenchers before us. Baldwin turned to me, that perpetual smile in place. "We gather here in thanks for the harvest and to celebrate the safety restored to our roads by Lady Daenerys' valor. Truly, your leadership is a blessing." At his prompting, the hall applauded politely. I dipped my head, allowing the moment of formal tribute to pass. Then Baldwin continued, "As we feast, let us put aside the troubles of war, if only for an evening, and enjoy the bounty of our land." The music resumed. Servants served roast venison with herbs, followed by bowls of hot stew brimming with carrots and onions. Conversation rose around the tables, a lively murmur of voices. I made small talk with Baldwin. He asked about the battles I'd fought, how the fortress fared, and whether any new instructions had come from the freehold. I kept my answers bland, claiming there was little to report. He nodded sympathetically, feigning interest in the complexities of Valyrian governance. I tried not to bristle at how genuine he seemed. As the meal progressed, I noticed him glance occasionally at Saran, who was engaged in polite conversation with a knight from House Woad. Now and then, I caught him observing some of Andros's men too, as though gauging their presence. His expression never faltered, but I could sense the gears whirring behind his eyes. The talk at the table wove through topics of local news: wolves sighted in the hills, some disease striking a distant farm, a successful fishing season. Occasionally, a lord or lady expressed relief that the rebels had been subdued. One knight patted my forearm, saying, "We owe you a debt for ending those bandits, my lady." Yet in his eyes, I detected a flicker of something less than gratitude, perhaps fear or resentment. After all, Valyria's presence cast a long shadow. Midway through the feast, dancers took the center of the hall. A small group of minstrels played a merry reel and couples spun across the floor, their silks and velvets swishing in time to the beat. Baldwin leaned over to me, raising his voice over the music. "Would you care to dance, Lady Daenerys? Or shall I fetch you more wine?" I forced a polite chuckle. "I'm afraid my shoulder is still healing from a minor wound. Dancing might be ill-advised." He nodded with a flourish of concern. "Yes, I recall you were wounded. Terrible business. But at least you prevailed. Perhaps we'll dance at the next feast when you're fully recovered." Inwardly, I wondered if that day would ever come. Aloud, I merely sipped my wine. It was rich and heady with a dark berry aftertaste. I let the conversation drift, occasionally exchanging pleasantries with the other guests. All the while, I scanned the hall, hoping to catch a slip of the tongue or a suspicious exchange. Yet Baldwin's domain was well ordered. Servants moved gracefully, each corner lit enough to discourage secret dealings. If there was something to find, it wouldn't be in plain sight. When the dancers finished, a troupe of traveling performers entered with drums, jingling bells, and bright masks. They began a lively performance, twirling ribbons in the air. A hush of admiration swept over the crowd. Baldwin clapped enthusiastically, urging them to continue. Amid this distraction, Saran approached me, leaning in as if to comment on the show. She kept her voice low. "My lady, I just overheard a guard mention something about a storage cellar beneath the western wing." He was cautioning another not to linger there. I felt a spark of interest. "Did you learn why?" She shook her head slightly. "Only that it's off-limits tonight without the steward's direct order." I considered. If Baldwin had anything to hide, he might have stashed it in a lesser-used cellar. A place servants knew not to roam. "We need a look down there," I whispered. "But discreetly." Saran nodded, slipping back into the crowd. I remained at the table, feigning interest in the performance while tension crept along my spine. How to explore that cellar without drawing attention? If Baldwin noticed me or Andras missing, he might guess something was afoot. Still, we'd not come all this way to share idle gossip. We needed evidence. Once the performance ended, I made a show of rising from my seat and inclining my head to Baldwin. "Excuse me, my lord, I need a moment to refresh myself. The journey and the festivities have been rather long." He half rose, concern lining his face. "Of course, my lady. Shall I send one of my servants to guide you?" I smiled thinly. "No need. I believe I remember the way from earlier tours of your fine hall. Enjoy the entertainment. I'll rejoin you shortly." He offered a courteous bow and I departed the head table with measured steps, careful not to appear hasty. As I exited the great hall, a handful of guests offered polite nods and a pair of Baldwin's guards stood in the corridor, each with a halberd in hand. I forced a pleasant smile and glided past them, turning down the passage that led toward the guest quarters. Once I was out of their sight, I veered into a side corridor that I recalled from previous visits was seldom used. My breath came quicker. My shoulder twinged, reminding me I wasn't fully fit for a confrontation, but adrenaline spurred me on. Torch brackets along the walls gave minimal light. I moved softly, listening for footsteps. After a few turns, I saw Saran ahead, standing near a heavy oak door that was latched with a sturdy iron bar. She looked relieved that I found her. "I think this leads to the western wing cellar," she whispered. The guard's voice carried from this direction earlier. I tried the latch. Locked. Saran produced a small set of picks from under her cloak and knelt by the keyhole. She worked nimbly. Within moments, I heard a soft click. We exchanged a tense glance, then I eased the door open. The air immediately felt cooler, carrying a faint draft of musty dampness. We descended a flight of worn stone steps that spiraled downward. The flickering torchlight from the corridor behind us cast long shadows on the walls. At the bottom of the stairs, we emerged into a storage cellar with a low ceiling braced by thick wooden beams. Barrels and crates lined the walls, some stacked precariously high. A single torch sputtered in a bracket, casting a ruddy glow over the dusty floor. The space smelled of old hay, spilled wine, and something else, something pungent that pricked my nose, reminiscent of the black powder we had found at the rebels' camp. Saran and I exchanged a look. "Careful," I whispered. We moved further in, scanning the stacked barrels. Some were labeled with chalk, presumably wine or salted fish. Others had no markings, just a black hawk crudely painted on the wood. My pulse quickened. There it was, that same crest we'd seen on the crates in the rebel camp. The hawk across the sea provides. Saran gently ran her hand over one such barrel. Then she pried the lid up with a small lever. We peered inside. Shredded packing straw filled the top layer. Underneath, I glimpsed small canisters of black powder, tied in wax-sealed pouches. Enough to blow a gate open or arm a rebel band many times over. My gut twisted in a surge of anger and triumph. Here was the proof. Baldwin was storing large quantities of contraband materials, presumably to distribute to the Greyhawks or other insurgents. Saran's eyes flashed. She moved to another crate and cracked it open, revealing crossbow bolts, arrowheads, more black powder. Enough to supply a small army. A swirl of emotions churned in me, relief that we had found the evidence, fury that Baldwin had lied so brazenly, and a glimmer of worry that he might have accomplices. We needed more information. The guard who'd told others to stay away might be on patrol. We had to be fast. Before I could speak, we heard footsteps on the stairs behind us. Saran tensed, pushing the crate closed. Quickly, we slipped behind a tall stack of barrels, snuffing out the small lantern we carried and crouching in the shadows. My heart hammered. We watched the door. A figure descended, holding a torch. I peered through a gap between two barrels. The man wore a dark cloak with Baldwin's oak sigil near the collar. As he reached the cellar floor, I recognized him, the steward who had greeted us earlier, the one who oversaw the household staff. He surveyed the cellar, the dancing torchlight revealing a sour expression on his face. Then he approached the Black Hawk barrels, inspecting them with practiced familiarity. He set down a small ledger on a crate, flipping pages. "Shipment from the Iron Islands, arrival confirmed," he muttered, voice echoing in the quiet. "Lord Baldwin wants these moved to the hidden hold by next moon. More coin from across the sea. The hawk grows stronger. The fools in the fortress suspect nothing." I clamped my hand over my mouth to stifle a gasp. We had him. The steward was complicit, speaking openly of Baldwin's direct link to the Iron Islands. Saran's tension radiated. For a moment, I contemplated leaping out and apprehending him on the spot. But if we confronted him here, we risked letting him shout for guards, turning the entire manor against us in an instant. And if Baldwin heard we were prowling his cellar, he might slip away or destroy any further evidence. We needed cunning. The steward moved toward another stack of crates where a locked chest sat. He produced a key and opened the chest, rummaging inside. I saw glints of metal. Possibly coin. Possibly letters or documents. If we could secure them, it would be undeniable proof of Baldwin's involvement. My shoulder throbbed painfully, my breath ragged. Saran and I exchanged a look that spoke volumes. We had to act. But we also had to do it without raising an alarm if we could help it. I mouthed silently, on my signal. She nodded, hand sliding to a dagger at her belt. We edged around the barrels, steps muffled on the dusty floor. The steward, oblivious, was counting coins into a pouch. The torch in his other hand bobbed with each motion. I braced myself, ignoring my injuries' protests, and rushed forward in a silent lunge. Suran circled wide to cut off his retreat. He heard us only at the last moment, spinning with shock in his eyes. The torch guttered, nearly falling from his grip. I shoved him against the crates, pressing my dagger to his throat. Suran caught the torch before it hit the floor and set it aside. The steward's free hand twitched as if to reach for a weapon, but my blade pricked his skin, drawing a bead of blood. "Don't move," I hissed. His eyes were wild, flicking between me and Suran. What are you doing down here? You have no right." I pushed him harder. "You're storing black powder and weapons for rebels. And I heard you name Lord Baldwin. You're going to explain everything." Fear contorted his features. I don't." Suran stepped forward, her dagger aimed at his belly. "You do. Speak quietly. If you raise your voice, you'll be bleeding on this floor in seconds." He swallowed audibly, sweat forming on his brow. All right, he whispered, trembling. "Just don't kill me. I'm only following orders. Lord Baldwin has a deal with men from the Iron Islands. He invests in their shipping routes, and in return, they supply him with black powder, crossbows, whatever he needs. He used to smuggle them to rebellious lords who hate the Valyrians. They pay him well. He wants to keep the region unstable so the taxes remain lower, the oversight from the fortress weaker. And if the rebels succeed somehow, he expects a high seat in the new order." My jaw tightened, rage searing my veins. Foolishness. He thinks he can dethrone Valyria with a ragtag force and Ironborn gold? The steward's gaze darted around as though searching for an escape. He hopes the chaos spreads, that if enough lords rebel across the 7 kingdoms, the dragons will be stretched thin. Old Valyria might become preoccupied with conflicts in Essos. He's certain you can't hold everything forever. "Traitor," Suran snarled. "And where are these shipments from the Iron Islands going next?" He licked his lips. "He wants them hidden in another secret depot south of here. There's an old ruin where the Hawksmen gather. Lord Baldwin's to host a meeting with their envoy soon, in a day or 2. They'll finalize the next handoff." I pressed the blade fractionally closer to his throat. "Who is this envoy? Where do they come from?" "Someone named Rothner, a sea captain from Pike, I believe," he stammered. "That's all I know. Please, let me go. I was only doing what Lord Baldwin commanded. If I refused, he'd have tossed me out to starve." Suran and I exchanged a charged glance. We had enough to destroy Baldwin, physical proof in these crates, a confession from his steward, ties to the Greyhawks. My mind raced with how best to proceed. If we stormed upstairs now and tried to arrest Baldwin publicly, it could turn into a bloodbath, with half his guards loyal to him. But letting him remain free, even for a moment, felt intolerable. Then a sudden thought flashed. What if we turned this meeting with the Ironborn envoy to our advantage? We could capture him red-handed, forging a blow not just against Baldwin but against the Iron Islands plot as well. That might send a stronger message to any other would-be conspirators in Westeros. I backed up a step, letting the steward breathe. "Take that ledger," I said to Suran, pointing at the small book he'd left on the crate. "Gather a few of those Blackhawk pouches as evidence. We'll keep them hidden for now." She complied swiftly, tucking the ledger and a handful of incriminating crossbow bolts into a cloth bag. I glared at the steward. "You'll remain silent about this. If you warn Baldwin that we know, your life is forfeit. Is that clear?" His face was ashen. I swear. I won't say a word." Suran looked at me. "We can't just leave him here. He might run anyway." I considered. "We'll lock him in. That door at the top of the stairs. We'll bar it and set a guard outside if we can manage quietly. He'll be our secret prisoner for the moment." He tried to protest, but I forced him to the far side of the cellar, near a stout support beam. Suran found a length of chain and manacles used for storing or restraining large animals or people, and she secured his ankle. "If you behave, we'll feed you and spare you," I told him coldly. "If you make a sound that alerts anyone upstairs, you'll regret it." Then I retrieved the torch from Suran. The steward slumped against the beam, tears threatening in his eyes, silently cursing his choices, or perhaps cursing us. We retraced our steps to the stairwell, extinguished the torch, and slipped out. Once in the corridor, we barred the door from the outside. I exhaled shakily. My shoulder felt like it was on fire, and I realized the confrontation had taken more out of me than I'd let on. But the adrenaline kept me upright. Saran placed a hand on my elbow, guiding me back toward the main halls. Now what? She breathed. We have the ledger. We have enough evidence to condemn him. Yes, I whispered, but we can do better. If we wait for this meeting with the Ironborn envoy, we can catch them in the act. That means seeing how we can stay at Oaken Shield Hall or slip away and return with a force. But I can't give Baldwin too much time. He might start suspecting something if we linger. As we reached the more populated corridors, we forced ourselves to adopt calm, casual postures. A few guests bustled past, returning from the feasts dancing or heading to private chambers for a moment of respite. Thankfully, no one questioned our presence. We quietly returned to the hall's main entry. The feast was still in full swing. Laughter and applause rippled from within. I pushed open the double doors to find the tables now partly cleared, minstrels taking center stage with a lively tune. Baldwin was not at the head table. I scanned the crowd and spotted him near the dais, speaking with a cluster of local knights. We circled the perimeter, maneuvering behind tapestry-draped walls to keep from drawing his eye. After a moment, Andrus and one of his men approached us, apparently having noticed our absence. "Where were you?" Andrus asked in a low voice. I was worried Baldwin might suspect something. I quickly explained what we'd found, showing him the Blackhawk crest we'd lifted from a crate. His eyes narrowed. "So it's confirmed. The man is a snake in league with rebel elements." He drummed his fingers on the hilt of his sword. "We could arrest him right now with the men we have." "Too risky," I murmured. "He has many guards here. We'd be outnumbered and the guests might panic or fight us. We also want to net the Ironborn envoy. If we can crush that link, we send a loud message to the entire region." Andrus nodded reluctantly. "Then we'll need a plan to either slip away or feign ignorance, then return with enough force to corner Baldwin at the meeting." Saran spoke up. "We can't let the steward starve in that cellar. We must handle this soon." I set my jaw. "We'll slip out early tomorrow morning, pretending we have other duties. Baldwin's pride might be stung, but we'll claim pressing official business demands our return to Orian's Crest. Then we'll gather more troops, return quietly, and watch for the Ironborn. If we time it right, we can swoop in at the meeting, capture Baldwin and his collaborators." Andrus let out a breath. "It's bold. He might suspect something once you leave." "Perhaps," I admitted, "but I'll give him plausible reasons. He'll be caught between suspicion and an unwillingness to offend a Valyrian noble. If he tries to bolt, we'll still intercept him on the road. We'll position watchers outside Embershade. By the time we're done, we'll have him surrounded." We glanced back into the swirl of feasting. Baldwin, still wearing that polished smile, was laughing at some jest delivered by one of his knights. He had no idea we'd uncovered his secret. I felt a surge of grim satisfaction and also a pang of sadness that yet another Westerosi lord saw no path but treachery. Such was the price of empire, I supposed. For now, we had to pretend everything was normal. I returned to my seat at the high table, ignoring the fire in my shoulder. Baldwin greeted me with a hearty grin. "Ah, Lady Daenerys, I trust you found your rest? The festivities shall continue well into the night, but do pace yourself. We wouldn't want to aggravate your injury." I forced a polite laugh, swirling the wine in my goblet. "You are too kind. This is a splendid celebration. I'm afraid, though, that I might need to depart at dawn. Urgent matters at the fortress call me back." I adopted a regretful tone. "I wish I could linger longer, but duty presses." He inclined his head, feigning sympathy. "I understand. A woman of your stature has many burdens. Though I hope you'll return soon to further strengthen the ties between our domains." If only he knew how strong those ties would soon be, iron shackles binding him in my dungeons. "I'd be delighted," I lied smoothly. "After all, we share the same goal, ensuring peace and prosperity under Valyria's watchful guardianship." My words tasted of irony on my tongue, but he merely nodded, raising his goblet to mine. "Indeed," he said, a glimmer in his eyes that I could now see for what it was: ambition, treachery, greed. But he drank deeply, oblivious that I had seen through him at last. The feast wore on into the late hours. I made sure to appear gracious, conversing politely, accepting a single dance from an old lord who insisted. My bandaged shoulder ached fiercely afterward, and I excused myself once more. As I left the hall, I paused at the doors to glance back at the swirling colors, the swirling music, the swirl of illusions. Baldwin moved among his guests, face alight with triumph as if his plots were nearing fruition. My heart beat in quiet resolution. I would not let his betrayal stand. By the time the hawk spread its wings, the dragon would already be at his throat. We slept lightly in the guest chambers, each of us taking turns standing watch. At the first hint of dawn, our retinue gathered in the courtyard. Baldwin's steward was nowhere to be seen. Of course, he remained chained in the hidden cellar, alive but trapped. Another caretaker apologized that the master of the hall was still Abed but would no doubt be sorry to see us depart so soon. I feigned regret, explaining official duties required my immediate return, and left a flowery note of thanks for Baldwin to read upon waking. Then, with the early light gilding the rooftops of Embershade, we rode out. Hooves clattered on the cobblestones, and as soon as we left the town gates behind, we spurred our mounts faster, heading for Orian's Crest. During the ride, I felt the weight of what was to come. If we succeeded, Baldwin would be removed from power, his estate seized, and the Ironborn conduit severed. But men like him were never alone in their ambitions. This was only one piece in the tapestry of rebellion that lingered under Valyria's dominion. Still, it was a piece worth removing, and it might send a warning to anyone else who conspired with the Greyhawks. We arrived at Orian's Crest before midday, breathless and covered in road dust. Andros barked orders for the gates to shut behind us. Saran immediately flew her drake overhead, scouting the roads leading in and out of Embershade to ensure Baldwin couldn't slip away unnoticed. We convened once more in the war room. I showed the ledgers and the Blackhawk items to the senior officers. A hush of astonishment settled over them, followed by growing anger. They now saw indisputable proof that a sworn Westerosi lord was fueling the rebellion right under our noses. Andros wasted no time. We planned to march out before sunrise the following day with a larger force, about 100 men, including cavalry and archers, plus a pair of small drakes for aerial surveillance. We would split into two contingents, one under Andros, which would take a discreet route around Embershade, blocking the southwestern roads, and one under my command, which would approach from the main road under cover of darkness. Our aim was to trap Baldwin within his own domain on the night we expected the Ironborn envoy to arrive. But first, we needed to confirm the date of the meeting. We had gleaned from the steward that it would be in a day or two, yet not an exact hour. I decided to employ a small group of scouts, Westerosi men loyal to House Maegor, who would slip into the forests near Oaken Shield Hall and watch for unusual arrivals. They left immediately, traveling light and avoiding main roads. If a band of Ironborn approached, we would know. The rest of that day passed in a frenzy of organization. We armed the men with swords, spears, and shortbows. We readied horses and pack mules. We distributed flasks of fire oil in case the rebels tried to burn the roads or the hall. Saran's drake soared back in the late afternoon, bringing word that all seemed calm at Baldwin's estate. He had not raised any alarms or left in a hurry. Probably he assumed we were none the wiser. Late that evening, one of our scouts returned, breathless and dusty from riding at breakneck speed. He reported that a small ship from the Iron Islands had been sighted off a hidden cove near Baldwin's lands, unloading a handful of armed men who carried sealed crates. They seemed to be traveling south, likely toward Oakenshield Hall. He guessed they would arrive by midnight or shortly after. That confirmed it. Tonight was the night of the meeting. We had no time to lose. I rallied the troops immediately. We set out in the darkness, torchlight flickering on our armor. The wind whipped across the coastal road, carrying the tang of salt. My shoulder throbbed beneath my mail, but I ignored it. Adrenaline pounded through my veins once more. We were heading into another confrontation, but this time the stakes were more than a few rebels in a forest. We were facing a hidden alliance that, if allowed to fester, could undermine Valyria's entire hold on Westeros. The night was moonless, the sky thick with clouds. We rode in near silence, the clang of harnesses muffled with cloth. My men were tense but resolute. Saran flew overhead, her drake nearly invisible in the gloom. If Baldwin had posted watchers, they might not see the beast until it was too late. Hours passed in a blur. Eventually, we saw the faint glow of Embershade's lights on the horizon. We skirted the town, crossing farmland by narrow lanes. Then, at the edge of an oak thicket, we halted to wait for a signal from our scouts. Not long after, a faint whistle drifted through the trees. One scout emerged, face streaked with dirt. "They're gathering in the orchard behind Oakenshield Hall," he whispered. We saw Lord Baldwin meeting with about a dozen men in cloaks, likely the Ironborn. They've wagons with them loaded with crates. Guards are posted around the orchard, but they're fewer than a score. Andros's face was grim. "We have them." I turned to the soldiers. "Spread out in the orchard's perimeter. Wait until I signal. We'll strike quickly to prevent them from retreating into the hall. If Baldwin's men resist, show no mercy." A hush of acknowledgement passed through the ranks. I caught Saran's gaze. She gave a tight nod, then slipped away, bound for her drake so she could watch from above. We advanced on foot, moving under the cover of the orchard's thick canopy. Gnarled apple trees stretched in neat rows, leaves stirring in a gentle breeze. My heart hammered. The orchard glimmered with the pale glow of lanterns placed at intervals on wooden posts. I crouched behind a trunk, peering ahead. Sure enough, a small group of men stood around 2 covered wagons. The Ironborn wore mismatched armor, and their leader, a stocky man with braided black hair, was discussing something with Baldwin in hushed but tense tones. Baldwin, clad in a dark cloak, gestured toward the wagons, pointing at the crates inside. The clink of coins told me payment was being exchanged. This was it, our moment. I signaled to Andrus, and he held up a hand. Our men fanned out. The orchard rustled softly with the movement of armed soldiers. The night swallowed our footsteps. The guards posted around the orchard, perhaps 10 of them, remained oblivious, eyes focused outward along the roads rather than among the silent trees. Then I rose, sword in hand. Now! I shouted, my voice echoing. At once our men surged forward from all sides, crossbows leveled, blades drawn. The orchard exploded with chaos. Shouts rose in alarm. One of Baldwin's guards raised a horn to his lips, but a crossbow bolt struck him down before he could sound it. The Ironborn envoy bellowed a war cry, drawing a broadaxe. Baldwin spun, his face twisting in shock and fury. Valyrian filth! The Ironborn roared, swinging wildly at the nearest soldier. My men rushed in, forming a ring that cut off any escape route to the hall. The orchard became a whirlwind of steel and torchlight. I dashed between trees, ignoring the fiery lance of pain in my shoulder. 2 of Baldwin's men lunged at me, their swords gleaming. I parried one blow, hooking my blade behind his hilt, and twisted. His sword clattered to the ground. With my free hand, I smashed the pommel of my weapon into his temple. He collapsed, unconscious or worse. The second guard slashed at me, but I ducked, though the movement sent agony ripping through my bandage. I hissed, ignoring the pain, and kicked his knee. He fell to one side, screaming. One of our knights finished him with a thrust. Sparks flew from clashing blades. Our archers fired from behind tree trunks, picking off foes who tried to flee. The Ironborn fought savagely, cursing us in the harsh dialect of their isles. They were outnumbered, but they were no cowards. I saw 2 of my men fall to vicious axe strokes. Steel bit into flesh, and screams filled the orchard. Then, overhead, Saran's drake unleashed a warning roar, streaking low across the orchard. The gust of wind from its wings scattered leaves and caused a momentary panic among the Ironborn. In that instant, more of my soldiers surged in, subduing them with coordinated strikes. I scanned the orchard for Baldwin. He was weaving between trees, clearly trying to flee toward the manor. 2 of his guards were at his side, clearing a path. Rage flared in me. I sprinted after him, breath ragged. He glanced over his shoulder, eyes wide at the sight of me approaching. Traitor! I shouted. Stop! He snarled, lifting a small crossbow that he had concealed beneath his cloak. The quarrel whizzed past my ear, so close I felt the wind of its flight. I rushed him before he could reload. One of his guards stepped in my path, swinging a sword. I parried his strike, and we locked blades, each pushing with gritted teeth. My shoulder screamed, but I had come too far to let a single guard stop me. Summoning all my strength, I twisted free and drove my blade into his chest. He crumpled. Baldwin turned to run again, but a swirl of wind from above signaled Saran's arrival on her drake. She circled overhead, brandishing a spear that crackled with the drake's small tongue of flame near its tip. Trapped, Baldwin reversed course. I advanced on him, sword raised. His chest heaved, and I saw raw fear in his eyes. The orchard around us was ablaze with shouting and conflict, but fewer men stood now. My soldiers had nearly secured the area. You don't understand, Baldwin gasped, stepping back until he nearly collided with a tree trunk. Valyria is a plague on these lands. I sought only to free them from your tyranny. You murdered loyal subjects. You funded terrorists, I said coldly, sword angled at his heart. All for gold and ambition. He swallowed. You're blind if you think we'll ever accept your rule. The day will come when your dragons can't save you. He shifted as though to make a desperate last move, but Saran swooped in from the side, her drake snarling and licking a small tongue of flame. He froze. I lunged forward, pressing the flat of my blade against his neck. It won't be today, I said. Surrender. He looked around at the orchard. His men defeated the Ironborn envoy pinned to the ground by 2 of my knights, the wagons claimed. A moan escaped his throat, half rage, half despair. Then he let the crossbow slip from his fingers and raised his hands. I yield, he spat, voice trembling with hatred. I exhaled, relief mingled with adrenaline. Take him, I ordered, beckoning 2 soldiers. They seized Baldwin, binding his hands with rope. Another group did the same to the Ironborn envoy, who cursed us in a guttural voice, promising retribution from the drowned god. The orchard floor was littered with the dead and dying. My men began methodically stripping weapons from the wounded, binding those who still posed a threat. I sank to one knee, my vision blurring momentarily from pain and fatigue. Saran dismounted her drake, rushing over to help me. Your shoulder, she murmured, checking the bandage beneath my armor's straps. Blood soaked through the cloth. I grimaced, standing with her support. I'll endure, I panted. Andrus jogged up, breathing hard. We've secured the orchard. The hall's guards, hearing the commotion, tried to come running, but they were cut off by our second contingent. They surrendered once they saw the drake overhead. Oaken Shield Hall is ours. I nodded, turning to Baldwin, whose face was twisted in bitterness. You will answer to the freehold for your crimes, I said. And the Ironborn alliance dies here. He spat at the ground. You've won nothing in the long run. Westeros will throw off your chains. Perhaps not today, but eventually. I stared at him, feeling an odd pang of pity. Then I gestured to my soldiers. Take him and the Ironborn to Orion's Crest. Confine them in the deepest cells. We'll see what they have to say under more formal questioning. In the distance, the orchard rustled with the movement of men retrieving crates from the wagons, unveiling more Blackhawk crests. The extent of Baldwin's treachery was laid bare under flickering torches. Darkness still clung to the horizon, though dawn would soon approach. I walked through the aftermath, stepping around the bodies. Some were local men, some from the Iron Islands, some were ours. This was the cost of maintaining Valyrian rule. Blood spilled in a silent orchard, good soldiers wounded or dead, a lord stripped of rank. When I reached the orchard's edge, I could see Oaken Shield Hall's stone walls lit by torchlight. Its gates now stood open, the fight gone out of those who once served Baldwin. A swirl of conflicting emotion churned in my chest, grim satisfaction at shutting down another threat, sorrow that it had come to this, and a fierce resolve to continue. Old Valyria had never fallen, but as I was learning that victory was an ongoing burden. If we let ourselves grow complacent, rebellions would spring up like weeds. We had to remain vigilant, forging ahead with both fire and cunning. I turned to Andrus, who was issuing orders for the bodies to be gathered and the orchard secured. Ensure the wounded from both sides receive care, I said. We're not savages. Then prepare the men to occupy Oaken Shield Hall until we've confirmed no further caches are hidden. He saluted. At once, my lady. Saran helped me tighten the makeshift bandage on my shoulder. I swallowed a groan, forcing myself to stand upright. Let's see what else Baldwin left behind in that manner. We should find his ledgers, letters, anything that might implicate other conspirators. She nodded, eyeing me with concern. You need rest, Daenerys. Soon, I promised. After we finish this. We headed for the manor, stepping over the threshold under the watchful gaze of my soldiers. The halls were dim and hushed, flickering torches revealing cowering servants. Some cried for mercy, insisting they had nothing to do with their lord's treason. I instructed the men to detain them peacefully, separating them until we could determine who was innocent. Room by room, we searched for hidden compartments or locked chests that might hold more evidence. In Baldwin's private solar, we found a desk strewn with parchments, notes referencing shipments, coded messages from the Iron Islands, even letters from other minor houses that expressed discontent under Valyrian rule. Some were vague, others more explicit. It seemed Baldwin had cast a wide net, hoping to rally multiple lords to his cause. I collected each piece, eyes scanning quickly for recognized sigils or names. A few contained half-burned seals indicating the possibility that other conspirators existed beyond the western shores. My stomach twisted at the implications. This was bigger than one traitorous lord. Saran helped me gather the documents. We'll take these back to Orion's Crest. With Baldwin in custody, we can question him further. Perhaps we'll learn which lords responded to his offers. Then we can root out the rest. Yes, I murmured, feeling a strange calm settle over me. We must. The more we uproot the seeds of rebellion, the fewer battlefields we'll have to fight in the future. But some corner of my mind doubted whether such seeds would ever be fully eradicated. Men would always resent an empire that came from across the sea, wielding dragons as enforcers. Outside, the night's grip was loosening. A faint gray light crept over the orchard, revealing the bodies and the captured wagons more starkly. Soldiers moved to and fro, finalizing the takeover. One cart with the Blackhawk crates sat unguarded for a moment, allowing me a clear look at the emblem painted on the sides. The hawk's wings seemed to stretch, as if taunting me with the notion that rebellion could always find flight. But as I watched, a soldier hammered a pry bar beneath the crest, splintering the wood. The hawk image cracked and peeled away. Such was the fate of those who challenged Valyria's dominion. We spent the rest of that morning consolidating our hold on Oaken Shield Hall. Baldwin, under heavy guard, was dragged away with the Ironborn envoy, both cursing our names. Once the wounded were tended, I oversaw the dispatch of messages back to Orian's Crest and, through secured channels, across the sea to the Freehold. My father would want to know of Baldwin's treachery and the Ironborn's role in fueling local uprisings. Perhaps this would spur a larger crackdown or a demonstration of Dragonfire along the coasts. I only hoped it would not spiral into a larger conflict. By noon, the sun finally broke through the clouds, brightening the orchard. In the daylight, it resembled a battlefield after all. Crumpled bodies, trampled rows of young apple trees, broken crates strewn about. My men dug graves for the dead. I trudged through the orchard, feeling each step weigh upon me like stones. After a time, I found a quiet corner near a gnarled old tree, away from the stench and carnage. There, for just a moment, I allowed myself to lean against the trunk and close my eyes. The wind stirred the leaves overhead, whispering of simpler days that seemed more like a myth. My shoulder throbbed in time with my heartbeat, a constant reminder of the fragility of flesh and the cost of ambition. Baldwin's, the Ironborn's, even ours. Then I opened my eyes, the fleeting moment of rest gone. I was Deneira Mager, a daughter of Valyria, entrusted with maintaining order in this domain. If I faltered, if I let sentiment or exhaustion dull my vigilance, men like Baldwin would multiply in the shadows. I pushed away from the tree, squaring my shoulders despite the pain. There was work to be done. Documents to read, conspirators to question, a land to keep under the dragon's shadow. Saran approached, wiping sweat from her brow. We've secured the remainder of the hall. Some of the staff have surrendered. Others claim ignorance. We'll sort them out. Are you ready to head back to Orian's Crest? Yes, I said quietly, sliding my sword back into its scabbard. We'll leave a garrison here to hold Oaken Shield Hall, at least until the Freehold decides otherwise. Let's escort Baldwin and the Ironborn to the fortress dungeons. Their fate can be sealed there. She offered me her arm for support, and we made our way back toward the courtyard where horses were being saddled. Amid the exhaustion, I felt a small flicker of triumph. Another cell of rebels dismantled, another traitor unmasked, another alliance shattered. Our victory was real, though I couldn't shake the sense that in other corners of Westeros, more hawks might be taking flight. We set forth along the same road we'd traveled, accompanied by a somber caravan of prisoners. The orchard receded behind us, a place that would linger in my memory as both a victory and a grim testament to the cost of dominion. The wheel of conquest turned, unrelenting, and I rode at its forefront, carrying the legacy of a Valyria that never fell, determined to keep this corner of the empire in line, no matter the blood it drew from my veins or the scars it left on my soul. Yet as the sea wind whipped across my face, I felt a certain steadiness in my heart. I had uncovered treachery, saved countless lives from further raids, safeguarded the cause I was born to serve. In the eyes of the Freehold, I had done what was necessary. In the eyes of Westeros, I was still a foreign conqueror. Perhaps that would never change. But if there was any measure of peace to be had on these shores, I would fight for it. I would bear the weight of the dragon's shadow, forging ahead with sword in hand and cunning mind at work, proving that old Valyria's children were as resolute as the flames that had once threatened to consume us all. They returned to Orion's Crest beneath a sky the color of beaten lead, their victory burdened by the knowledge that it was only the latest in a chain of battles that might never end. The prisoners, Baldwin foremost among them, rode in a somber column, wrists bound, escorted by a double line of soldiers. Silence clung to them once they passed through the fortress gates. Wind scoured the courtyard, setting the banners flapping overhead in a sharp metallic rattle. Members of the garrison emerged with cautious stares, for rarely was a Westerosi lord dragged in as a captive of the Freehold. Yet here Baldwin was, forced from his horse, the reins yanked from his hands, his fine cloak torn and muddied from the orchard fight. Rhaenyra dismounted slowly. Her shoulder was by now in fierce pain, each movement causing her muscles to clench in protest. She forced herself to stand tall, taking measured breaths as Andras and Saran oversaw the distribution of the prisoners. The newly captured Ironborn envoy Rothnir, if the steward's story was true, shot her venomous glares. 2 of his men had survived, both sporting wounds from the skirmish. The rest had died in the orchard. This small cluster of captives was marched off under heavy guard. Already, stable hands were leading away the exhausted horses, and the fortress healers scurried about, searching for any among Rhaenyra's troops who needed immediate attention. Through chapped lips, Rhaenyra ordered Andras to see Baldwin and the envoy placed in separate dungeon cells with no chance of contact. "I want each man guarded by at least 2 of our own at all times," she said. "No local recruits on this detail. And no prisoner gets a single scrap of parchment or a single whispered visitor without my approval." Andras saluted, his gaze resting on Baldwin's sagging form. Then he led the men away, leaving Rhaenyra alone in the courtyard with a handful of the fortress staff, who waited to assist her. She watched Baldwin vanish into the gloom of the inner keep, escorted by unsmiling soldiers. His eyes never left hers, even as they disappeared beyond the threshold. Saran approached, sliding off her drake with a quick pat to the creature's flank. The animal hissed softly, wings folding. Saran offered a hand to Rhaenyra, noticing her pallor. "You're pushing yourself again," she said. "Let's get you to the healers. Or at least to your chambers so they can treat your wound properly." Rhaenyra wanted nothing more than to comply. The orchard skirmish had exhausted her reserves, and the hours-long ride back had not improved matters. Yet she loathed the idea of resting when fresh conspiracies demanded her attention. "I can see a healer briefly," she said at last, fatigue hollowing her voice. "But I won't be abed for days, Saran. There's too much at stake. We have documents to sort, interrogations to conduct, and we must send word to my father about what we found in Baldwin's hall. If we delay, it could cost us everything we've accomplished." Saran sighed, nodding. "We'll manage. Just don't pass out on the floor. Come on." She guided Rhaenyra into the keep, where torches lined the corridors against the mid-afternoon murk. Attendants pressed themselves flat against the walls, giving her wide berth, murmuring greetings or prayers for her swift recovery. The hush felt oppressive, as though the fortress itself was holding its breath after witnessing the parade of prisoners. In her chambers, 2 healers awaited her. Helena, the one who had treated her before, and a younger assistant carrying a steaming bowl of herbal water. They insisted on removing Rhaenyra's armor to examine her shoulder. Saran stood guard at the door, arms folded. Rhaenyra gritted her teeth while Helena removed the bandages, revealing raw skin half sealed by scabs that now threatened to tear. Blood had seeped into the cloth on the ride back. "This is worse than before," Helena admonished, giving Rhaenyra a sharp look. "You've been fighting and riding for hours. The wound is inflamed and some tissue is torn anew. I must clean it properly." Rhaenyra pressed her lips together, nodding. She felt sweat break across her brow from the pain. The younger assistant dabbed at the wound with a soaked cloth, and each contact was like fire. She clenched the arms of the chair, refusing to cry out. Finally, Helena applied a thick mixture of pungent herbs and honey onto the open gash. The sting was immediate and vicious, but Rhaenyra clung to silence. "You'll need stitches," Helena said after a moment's inspection. "A few to keep the skin from splitting further." She gave Rhaenyra no chance to argue and reached for a needle and thread. Saran hovered, concern etched on her face. Rhaenyra nodded her assent, then braced herself. Helena's needle did its work swiftly and skillfully, though each prick felt like a burn. Rhaenyra's teeth felt ready to crack beneath the pressure of her jaw. By the time it was done, sweat slicked her hairline and her breathing was shallow. The healer wrapped her shoulder snugly with fresh linen and offered her a cup with a few drops of milk of the poppy. Rhaenyra shook her head at first, but Helena insisted. "This is not a time for stubbornness," she said, placing the cup in Rhaenyra's trembling hand. "Drink it, rest for an hour at least. Then if you insist on interrogating your traitor lord, you'll be in better shape." Rhaenyra could not find the strength to argue. She downed the mixture, letting the faint numbness spread through her veins. Helena helped her onto the bed, where she sank onto the covers. Vaguely, she was aware of Saran conferring with the healers, of the hush of voices in the corridor. Then her eyelids fluttered shut, and the world dissolved into a haze of pain and half-formed dreams. She woke before dusk, stiff and sore but clear-headed. The poppy mixture had dulled the worst of the pain. Her bandaged shoulder felt heavier, as though lead weighed it down. Sitting up, she saw fresh candles lit in the sconces, the chamber's tapestries shifting in the breeze from a half-open window. The fortress was quiet beyond the walls, a deceptive calm, for she knew the men were busy with the newly arrived prisoners. Her sword and cloak hung neatly on a stand by the door. A discreet knock announced Saran, who entered once Daenerys bade her come. "You look better," Saran observed, though her eyes still flicked anxiously to Daenerys' bandaged arm. "Helena said you could move about if you're careful." Daenerys swung her legs over the bed, testing her balance. "I'm done with lying here. Any news from the dungeons?" Saran nodded, stepping closer. Andros has begun preliminary questioning of Baldwin and the Ironborn envoy. So far, both are defiant. Baldwin refuses to speak beyond a few curses. The envoy spat at our men and demands they release him as a free subject of the Iron Islands. Obviously, we refused. Daenerys forced herself upright, ignoring the twinge that shot through her shoulder. "Then I'll have to conduct the interrogations more directly. Let's go." They departed, descending into the fortress's lower levels. A pungent gloom clung to the corridors, wet stone, old straw, the reek of stale air. Lanterns flared against the blackness. The jailers saluted Daenerys, who moved past them with purpose. The corridor to the deepest cells was narrow, forcing them to walk single file. Near a small guard station, she found Andros conferring with two men. He bowed at her approach. "My lady, I assumed you'd come soon," he said. "Shall we begin?" "Bring Baldwin first," Daenerys ordered. "I want him separated from the others. No chance to overhear or coordinate stories." Andros gestured for two guards to retrieve Baldwin from his cell. Saran and Daenerys stepped into a small chamber designed for interrogations, a single torch on the wall, a heavy table scarred with age, a pair of chairs. A faint odor of sweat and fear lingered from previous uses of this room. Daenerys took her seat behind the table. Saran stood to one side, arms crossed. A moment later, Baldwin was brought in, wrists shackled, escorted by two stern-faced soldiers. They pressed him onto a chair opposite Daenerys. He did not look like the regal lord of Oaken Shield Hall anymore. His hair was disheveled, eyes rimmed with exhaustion, face bearing the bruises from his capture. Yet his gaze still held defiance. Daenerys let the quiet stretch a moment, then spoke. "Lord Baldwin, your attempt to flee was futile. As you see, Oaken Shield Hall is under our control. Your men have surrendered. The Ironborn envoy is in our dungeons." He flinched, though he tried to hide it. "You think this changes anything, Valyrian? Others will see how I was treated. It will stoke their anger, fan the flames of rebellion." Daenerys leaned forward, ignoring the ache in her shoulder. "They will see you for the traitor you are, consorting with bandits and foreign raiders. You'll face justice under the Freehold, which has tolerated your rank despite your repeated deceptions. Unless you choose to speak truth, your punishment will be swift and final." He let out a rasping chuckle. "There is no justice in your reign. Only fear. That's why I did what I did. People are tired of bending the knee to foreign conquerors." She studied him, reading the mix of bitterness and desperation etched on his features. "If that's so, then you should be eager to spread your story. But let's be honest, you conspired out of ambition, not out of charity. The orchard crates we seized were full of crossbows, black powder, enough to arm hundreds of rebels. You profited from these shipments, didn't you?" A flicker of guilt crossed his face. "A man has to protect his own. The Ironborn offered me the means to drive you out, though I suspect they'd have turned on me eventually." He spat toward the floor. "You must realize your hold on Westeros is weak. House Targaryen, House Valyrian, House Maegor, you all rule by fire and fear. When the day comes that your dragons die or your empire falters, the old families will reclaim their birthrights." Daenerys felt her temper flare, but she kept her voice cold. "We remain unbroken. Old Valyria stands. Our dragons have not died, nor has our magic. If you think you can wait us out, you will find yourself in a shallow grave first. Give me names, details of other lords who share your plans. Help me root out further treachery, and perhaps you'll live to see another season." He snorted. "You promise mercy? Even if I gave you names, you'd tear them apart? And what is to stop you from executing me afterward?" She paused, meeting his gaze steadily. "I won't lie to you. You have spilled Valyrian blood through your betrayals. You face grave consequences. But if you truly wanted to help the people of Westeros, you might spare them more bloodshed by giving me the conspirators' names. In return, I can recommend a lesser sentence, exile, perhaps instead of death." His jaw tensed. "You'd send me across the sea to live under your watchful eye, forever branded a traitor. That's hardly living. Better than losing your head," she said quietly. Baldwin's face contorted. For a moment, she thought he might lash out physically, but the shackles kept him in place. He glanced at Saran, who stood like a statue, and then he fixed his eyes back on Daenerys. "I never wanted violence to spill onto these lands. But you left us no choice. Your father's taxes, your demands for tribute, they choke us. Men turn desperate. I just gave them a cause. You gave them illusions, Rhaenyra snapped. You accepted Ironborn gold and black market shipments to stoke a war that would drown half the coast. Don't pretend this was about freedom alone. He slumped slightly, looking at the table. When he spoke again, his voice was hoarse. I will not give you names. Let them come for you one day. Let them topple your black fortress. Let them feed your bones to the crows. Rhaenyra exhaled, letting the hush stretch again. She had expected as much. Then your fate is sealed, she said. I'll have Andros continue the questioning. If you decide to speak, you may send word. Baldwin's lips curled in disgust. But she caught a flicker of fear in his eyes, as though some small part of him realized the noose was tightening. She stood, gesturing for the guards. They yanked him from the chair and half-dragged him out of the chamber. His defiant cursing echoed off the walls until the door slammed. Saran let out a breath. He's stubborn. I doubt he'll yield easily. And even if he did, he might feed us lies to save himself. Rhaenyra nodded wearily, seating herself again to gather her strength. He might. Which is why we'll cross-check any claim he makes with the letters we found in his manor. Some were half-burnt but still legible. He's hardly the only conspirator. I want to see if the Ironborn envoy can shed more light. Saran signaled the guards again. Within minutes, they brought in Rothnir, the stocky man with braided hair who had brandished an axe in the orchard. He was bound tightly with cords, a bruise darkening his jaw. His eyes raked the room. Unlike Baldwin, he did not sit when forced onto the chair. He rocked forward as if testing the bonds. A guard shoved him down, but he only glared back. Rhaenyra spoke first. Rothnir of Pike, I presume. You were caught attempting to deliver contraband weapons to a traitorous Westerosi lord. The cargo we seized included black powder, crossbows, and coin from multiple free cities. Explain. He bared his teeth, half a sneer. I owe explanations to no Valyrian whelp. Her patience was thin after dealing with Baldwin. You stand in a Valyrian stronghold captured in the act of treason against the Empire. I suggest you cooperate. The Iron Islands are bound by treaty to pay tribute and keep the peace after the last war. What you've done is a clear violation. He spat on the floor, ignoring the guard's threatening step. We bend the knee to no one. We only pay your tribute because your dragons burned our ships when we refused. That does not mean we will kneel forever. And if there's a chance to stir rebellion across Westeros to weaken you, we'll take it. Baldwin and the rest are just pawns in our game. Rhaenyra's breath caught. So, the Ironborn indeed had bigger ambitions than a small alliance with one rebellious lord. Your game, she repeated, leaning forward. The Ironborn are cunning, but do you truly think you can overthrow Valyria? We have more dragons than you have ships. He smirked. Perhaps not overthrow. But if we... 'Cause enough havoc on these shores, you'll be stretched thin. Word from the east is that your empire juggles wars in the Stepstones, skirmishes in the disputed lands, unrest in the Basilisk Isles. So why not open another front in Westeros and watch you scramble? Chaos is our coin. Saran's hand drifted to her sword hilt. You would let these rebels burn half the continent if it means you get a chance to undermine us? You speak as though you're the hero, yet you're just another marauder. Rothnir shrugged, the cords biting into his shoulders. We are what we are. The Iron Islands have never pretended to be otherwise. Let me go or kill me. Makes no difference to me. Others will come after me. More ships, more captains. My death changes nothing. Rhaenyra realized that fear alone might not sway him. The Ironborn ethos prized courage in the face of death, especially if it served their ambitions. But still, she needed answers. Where else have you delivered shipments? She pressed. What other houses in Westeros are receiving your black powder and crossbows? He snorted. You think I have a ledger in my pocket? We do this in secret. My captain receives coin, we sail to the coast, unload, pass it to men with hawk-crested crates. Beyond that, I neither know nor care. Baldwin was only one. There are others who open their doors at night to us. A cold wave washed over Rhaenyra. So Baldwin was not the only link. And they all used the Black Hawk sigil? Or is that just your creation? He gave a humorless laugh. A convenient marker for crates, no more. My lord, my real lord, has bigger concerns. We brand it so we can track the shipments. If you thought you uprooted some grand rebellion by snatching one orchard deal, think again. Rhaenyra forced composure. Your real lord? Who is that? Some Ironborn chieftain. He shrugged again. We follow the old way, and our lord is the greatest reaver among us. If you think it's the old house whore, or that we're still squabbling over the drowned relics of our kings, you're more ignorant than I thought. Times have changed. The Iron Islands have new powers rising from the salt. She narrowed her eyes. Give me a name. He said nothing, face curling in that same sneer. Rhaenyra held his gaze. We can torture you. Drag out every secret in your mind. Are you prepared for that? His grin widened, as though he found the idea almost amusing. I've endured the lash before. The only difference is you have dragons. But they don't scare me, because I know you can't burn every inch of Westeros just to make me talk. I'm a small piece in a large game, Silverhair. Saran tensed, but Rhaenyra lifted a hand, calming her. She sensed that Rothnur wanted them to lash out, to become savage so he could wear the badge of martyrdom. Instead, she took a different tack. Fine. Sit in our dungeon. Rot there. You may fancy yourself a fearless reaver, but there are fates worse than a warrior's death. An Ironborn who lingers in a cell, powerless, where's the glory in that? His lips twitched. For a moment she thought he might fling more insults, but he simply scowled. I'd sooner die fighting than rot in your pit. Rhaenyra stood. Then remain silent if you wish. My men will see to it that you live long enough for me to revisit your case. Perhaps you'll be more talkative when the weeks turn to months. Rothnur spat again, missing her boot by an inch. The guard cuffed him on the side of the head. Rhaenyra motioned and they dragged him out. Silence filled the chamber in his absence, thick with the stench of sweat and frustration. She turned to Saran, meeting her friend's troubled gaze. They've told us little, Saran said. But it's clear the Ironborn are behind more than one rebellious faction. Baldwin is just one link. If others are conspiring with them, we have no guarantee we've stopped the flow of arms. Rhaenyra sank onto the chair, exhaustion tugging at her. I know. We need to parse the documents we seized from Baldwin's estate. That might give us leads on other traitorous lords. We also have his steward, that man we found in the cellar, though we locked him up. He should confirm details if properly pressed. I'll have Andrus fetch him, Saran offered. He might be more cowardly than Baldwin or the Ironborn. Possibly more inclined to trade secrets for leniency. Rhaenyra nodded. Yes, do it. Meanwhile, send word to my father. Summarize what we've uncovered about the Ironborn plan to arm rebels. If this is widespread, we might need reinforcements. I want a war dragon here, or at least on standby. Saran left, and Rhaenyra remained in the interrogation chamber a moment, massaging her forehead with her good hand. The feverish ache in her shoulder had returned, spiking with each heartbeat. Perhaps the milk of the poppy had worn off. She considered calling for more, but she could not afford a foggy mind right now. This crisis demanded clarity. At length, she rose and exited into the corridor. The jailers bowed, their eyes flicking nervously after the recent commotion. Rhaenyra dismissed them, climbing the stairs back to the fortress's upper levels. She paused by a narrow window slit, letting the cool ocean wind graze her face. Night had fallen fully, the courtyard lit by torches that glimmered on the basalt walls. A sense of dread churned in her stomach, balanced by cold resolve. She had done all she could for now, but the scale of the threat worried her. The Ironborn's plan to stoke rebellion across Westeros was more coordinated than she'd guessed. If they could encourage multiple lords to rise at once, it might distract the Empire just enough to strain its resources. She thought of the outer provinces in Essos, of the stepstones, of rumored tensions in Sithorios. Old Valyria ruled a vast domain that required constant vigilance. My father was right, she thought, we must never become complacent. There are cracks forming everywhere. She gripped the stone sill, feeling the salt-laced wind sting her eyes, and silently renewed her oath to hold this land for Valyria. Whatever it took. Even if she had to be the blade and the brand that seared away the seeds of treason. A distant clang made her turn. Saran returned, stepping lightly down the corridor. We have the steward. His name is Ranley. He's in a separate room under guard. Rhaenyra followed, passing through a short hallway to a smaller chamber. A single brazier lent enough heat to dispel the dungeon chill. Ranley, the steward who had once rummaged through crates in Baldwin's cellar, stood trembling, wrists shackled. He had evidently been given water and a chance to clean up. His clothes were rumpled but not filthy. His eyes lit with fear when he saw Rhaenyra. Two guards stepped back, letting her approach. Ranley, she said calmly, you remember our deal. I spared your life in Baldwin's cellar on the condition that you speak the truth. You have a final chance to prove useful. Otherwise, I can return you to the same darkness. He swallowed, nodding with jerky movements. I'll talk. Just promise you won't kill me. That depends on what you have to say. Daenerys motioned for him to sit on a low stool by the brazier. She remained standing, flanked by Saran. Start from the beginning. How did Baldwin get involved with the Ironborn? Ranley licked his lips. I was only his steward, you see, managing finances and shipments. About a year ago, he told me we'd be cooperating with friends from the sea. At first, it was small deals, exotic spices that arrived at night, or casks of special goods that we weren't to open. I suspected smuggling but didn't question it. Then it escalated. Suddenly, we were receiving crates of black powder from the Iron Islands, plus foreign gold. The crest of the Black Hawk was painted on everything. He confided in me that he was forging alliances with men who sought to rid Westeros of Valyrian rule. Daenerys' voice was level. Why didn't you report him to the fortress? Or did you relish the extra coin? He looked down, shame twisting his features. He threatened me. He said if I told anyone, he'd have me hanged, or worse, he'd turn me over to the Ironborn as a problem to be resolved. I had no illusions about surviving that. So I kept quiet, hoping it would all blow over. Saran's expression hardened. You still participated, though. You counted gold, oversaw shipments. Ranley's voice quavered. I had no choice. And I never personally killed anyone. I'm a servant, not a lord with an army. I was terrified. Daenerys tapped her fingers against the brazier's rim, absorbing his words. Fine. Your fear might be genuine. But Baldwin implied there are other lords involved. Do you know their names? He hesitated, eyes shifting. I heard rumors. He sometimes burned letters in his study. But a few times I caught glimpses. There's a mention of one Lord Barrowhall in the southern coast, a name scrawled in a coded note. Another time I saw something referencing Lady Draxfield in the Riverlands. Not sure if she's a lady or someone else. The message said her family might be sympathetic. Baldwin was always meeting with traveling messengers at odd hours. I'd see them vanish into his study, then leave at dawn. Daenerys frowned. Barrowhall. Draxfield. I'll have to see if they correspond to actual houses or if they're codenames. What about the Ironborn's next steps? Did you overhear any plans for bigger strikes? Ranley blew out a breath. I'm not certain. But the last time Baldwin spoke with that envoy Rothner, I heard them whisper about an uprising spree, simultaneous raids in several parts of Westeros, timed for the turn of the season. The idea was to force you Valyrians to divide your forces. The orchard deal was just one small piece where they'd stash extra black powder to arm any rebels in the western shores. A chill ran through Daenerys. So there may be multiple caches across Westeros. He nodded miserably. Likely. Baldwin never told me where. He only handled our local stash. She paced a step in the cramped room, mind racing. This was far more extensive than an isolated plot. When was this spree supposed to happen? I don't know exactly, Raleigh said. But from what I overheard, it could be soon, within weeks, maybe less, depending on how many local lords have agreed to rise. Daenerys exchanged a glance with Saran. This was the most alarming news yet, a widespread rebellion stoked by Ironborn arms possibly converging in a short span of time. She pressed her lips together. What else can you tell us about Baldwin's communications? Any particular method he used to contact them? Ranley gulped. He had a cipher, a small will hidden in his study desk. With it, he decoded messages. I only saw it once, but it's there. If you search thoroughly, maybe you'll find it. We used it to decipher coded instructions from the Ironborn. That's all I know, truly. Daenerys let him sweat in silence for a moment. She turned to Saran, who gave a confirming nod. It seemed plausible, and the steward had every reason to tell the truth now. All right, Ranley, Daenerys said. Continue to cooperate, and I'll consider sparing your life. You'll remain here, under guard, until I verify your claims. If I find you've lied, you'll hang alongside Baldwin. He nodded frantically. I swear on the seven, I'm telling the truth. Just spare me. Guard, Daenerys called, and one of the jailers stepped forward. Take him back to his cell, separate from the others. Ensure he has water and minimal discomfort. He may be useful yet. The guard saluted, tugging Ranley toward the door. The steward cast a pleading look over his shoulder, then vanished into the corridor. The heavy wooden portal closed with a thud behind him. Saran exhaled slowly. A spree of uprisings, he said. We should brace for more trouble than we ever anticipated. Daenerys nodded. We need that cipher from Baldwin's study. Have men search Oaken Shield Hall thoroughly. Also, let's compare these new names, Barrowhall, Draxfield, to any house records we have. If we find evidence they're real or if they correspond to known domains, we may need to intervene. Saran shifted her weight. We can't handle a widespread rebellion alone, not with only a few hundred men. We'll need your father's help or even the Targaryens. A war dragon or two. This could become a full-scale campaign. Daenerys' jaw tightened with the weight of the decision. We can't wait on the Freehold's bureaucracy. We'll dispatch ravens immediately, yes, but we must also act swiftly here. If the rebels strike next week or the week after, we can't afford to let them gather momentum. Saran agreed. They left the interrogation chamber, stepping into the corridor. A guard escorted them up to the main keep, where a swirl of activity awaited. Officers conferred about rotating watch shifts, scribes scuttled with armfuls of parchment, a few local knights paced in uneasy silence. The fortress felt taut with tension, as if at any moment fresh attackers might hurl themselves at the walls. That evening, Daenerys assembled a council of her most trusted officers in the fortress's war room. A large circular table dominated the space, topped by a detailed map of Westeros. Flickering torches cast shifting shadows across the black stone walls. Andras stood to her right, Saran to her left. Several other Valyrian knights and local sworn men ringed the table, focusing on Daenerys as she addressed them. Baldwin's conspiracy is only part of a broader scheme, she began. We have evidence the Ironborn are supplying arms and black powder to other lords across the 7 kingdoms who resent Valyrian dominion. They plan to orchestrate uprisings in multiple regions. Our mission is to identify and stop these cells before they grow strong. If we allow them to coordinate, we could face a multi-front rebellion that not only endangers this region but undermines our entire hold on Westeros. Andras nodded solemnly. What's our next step? Daenerys pointed to the map. First, we root out any hidden caches left by Baldwin's men here in the western shores. Then we expand our search. According to Baldwin's steward, there may be references to a Lord Barrowhall in the south, a possible Lady Draxfield in the Riverlands. These might be false leads or coded references, but we must investigate. In the meantime, we've sent ravens to my father requesting immediate reinforcements, especially a war dragon. If these rebel pockets are scattered, a dragon's mobility could be vital to responding quickly. A hush settled over the council. One of the local knights, a man named Ser Hark, cleared his throat. My lady, might this all be rumor and fear? The Ironborn are savage, but do they truly have the means to coordinate half a dozen rebellions? Daenerys regarded him. We've seen the black powder and crossbows. We've captured an envoy. This is more than rumor. We must prepare for the worst. I know it's difficult to imagine so many houses risking open revolt after centuries of Valyrian rule, but times change. If some sense weakness, they might test our resolve. Ser Hark bowed in acknowledgement, lips pressed tight. Another officer, Othries, who had served in Essos campaigns, spoke next. We should recall that unrest is growing in the free cities. Trade routes are threatened by pirates. The Empire has scattered resources, meaning fewer dragons on this side of the narrow sea. Perhaps the Ironborn see this as their chance. We must show them otherwise. Daenerys nodded, feeling a rush of gratitude for Othries' clarity. Exactly. We will muster a significant force from Orian's Crest, enough to pacify local pockets. Meanwhile, I want watchers posted at every major port from Lannisport north to Seaguard. If any Ironborn ships attempt to land more contraband, we intercept them. Andras banged a gauntlet fist on the table lightly. We'll need local knowledge too. Loyal knights or reeves who know the backroads, the hideaways. The Greyhawks gave us trouble before. Other cells might do the same. We'll handle it, Daenerys said. Assign men to track down any stray rebels from Baldwin's faction. There may still be outlaws lurking in the hills, waiting to regroup. Make sure they don't. The meeting continued into the night. They drew up rosters, assigned scouts, planned supply lines, and debated which hamlets might harbor sympathizers. By the time it ended, Daenerys felt as though she'd waged another battle. Her body ached in every joint, her mind swirled with the weight of so many decisions. Yet she knew this was only the beginning. Saran walked with her into a side corridor, the castle's torches guttering in the late hour. They paused by an arched window, gazing at the starless sky. The ocean's roar drifted faintly on the wind. You should sleep, Saran advised softly. We've done all we can tonight. Daenerys rubbed her temple. Yes, I know. She eyed the darkness. But I can't shake the feeling that something larger stirs just beyond our sight. The steward said weeks, but what if the Ironborn speed up their plan? Our own men are spread thinner than I'd like. Saran placed a reassuring hand on Daenerys' uninjured shoulder. You're doing everything possible. Rest. We'll find the strength to face whatever comes next. Daenerys managed a faint smile. Thank you. You rest too. Tomorrow we search Baldwin's cipher. Then we plan for any sign of revolt. They parted ways and Daenerys finally retreated to her chambers. She removed her boots and cloak, sank onto the bed, and stared at the vaulted ceiling. Sleep came in ragged bursts, plagued by images of burning ships and shouting armies. In her dreams, the Black Hawk emblem seemed to spread its wings over every corner of Westeros. When she woke hours later, sweat slicked her brow. Dawn light crept through the arrow-slit windows, pale and cold. She rose gingerly, her shoulders stiff under the fresh bandages. Helena would scold her again for not resting more, but Rhaenyra had no time. She pulled on a clean tunic, braided her silver hair, and belted her sword at her waist with careful movements. Outside the door, guards bowed as she passed. The fortress corridors were already bustling despite the early hour. Word had spread of the threatened uprisings, and men rushed about to prepare. She made her way toward the courtyard, ignoring the pinch of pain behind her collarbone. As she stepped onto the battlements overlooking the sea, crisp wind tugged at her hair. From here, she could see a wedge of ocean and the swirling gulls. She inhaled, letting the tang of salt center her for a moment. Then footsteps behind her announced Saran's arrival. She carried a small sheaf of papers and a determined look. "Reports from the men we sent to Oaken Shield Hall," Saran said. "They found Baldwin's cipher hidden behind a panel in his study. And more documents. Most were half-burned, but a few lines might be decipherable." Rhaenyra took the papers, scanning them. Her Valyrian eyes flicked over the scrawled script. There were references to the Hawk's flight, coded references to ships named Sea Vulture and Saltelone. There was mention of Barrow Hall invests. Draxfield requests more crossbows. Every line spoke to a network greater than Baldwin alone. She folded the pages. "Have our scribes decode the rest, and distribute warnings to every major settlement under our watch. If any messenger from these suspicious houses arrives, we detain them for questioning." They left the battlements, making their way to the fortress stables. Saran's drake perched on a high ledge, wings folded tight. Rhaenyra's heart clenched with the longing for her own war dragon, a mount that should have arrived from Valyria by N. Ow! But the complexities of shipping a newly hatched dragon combined with her father's caution had delayed it. She would not be recognized as a full dragon rider until her beast was grown enough to be handled. For now, she had to rely on smaller drakes like Saran's or on the war dragons of the Freehold if any came to their aid. 2 days passed in a blur of activity. Rhaenyra dispatched riders to villages and towns, cautioning them to watch for Ironborn agents. She personally oversaw the interrogation of a few more of Baldwin's henchmen, gleaning scraps of information about caches in the Western Hills. With each piece of intelligence, the scope of the threat grew. She found herself hunched over maps in the war room, marking potential hotspots with black pins. Saran and Andrus coordinated scouting parties that fanned across the countryside, searching for hidden storerooms or suspicious gatherings. The fortress became a hive of rumor. Soldiers muttered about possible Ironborn fleets lurking just beyond the horizon. Westerosi peasants who served in the fortress kitchens exchanged fearful whispers. Tension seeped into every corridor. And Rhaenyra felt it most keenly of all. She had become the focal point of a region teetering on the edge of upheaval. If she failed, the entire Valyrian grip on Westeros might begin to slip. Late on the second day, while Rhaenyra pored over a ledger in her chambers, a messenger arrived from across the sea, a man dressed in a red cloak bearing the seal of House Maegor. He was ushered inside under heavy guard. He bowed before Rhaenyra, breathless from his journey. "My lady, I bring word from your father. He received your raven and sends this reply." Rhaenyra broke the wax seal, scanning the parchment. Her father's handwriting was crisp, the Valyrian language swirling in measured lines. He expressed alarm at the news of possible widespread rebellion. He promised to dispatch additional troops by ship along with a proven dragonbinder who could help facilitate the arrival of a war dragon to Westeros. However, the letter also cautioned that tensions in Essos might delay large-scale reinforcements. The Freehold was entangled in a border conflict with a rival city-state, and certain High Council members resisted thinning their forces in Westeros' favor. The letter ended with a command: contain the threat. Prevent a general uprising at all costs. Rhaenyra lowered the parchment. She felt a surge of conflicting emotions, relief that help was promised, frustration that it might be too little or too late. She thanked the messenger, who retreated to recover from his journey. Then she turned to the window, rereading the lines in her mind. Prevent a general uprising. As though it were that simple. Yet it was her duty, her burden. Night fell again. Andros and Saran joined her in a private council. The flicker of torches cast their shadows on the chamber walls. A gust of wind rattled the shutters. Deneira explained what her father's letter said, the likely delay of major forces. Saran's face tightened. We might stand alone if the rebels strike soon. We're not entirely alone, Deneira answered. A small contingent of Valyrian swords can cross the narrow sea faster than a full legion, and with them, a war dragon might come. But we can't rely on it happening swiftly. Andros drummed his fingers on the table. So we must keep pressing. Root out the caches, arrest any known collaborators. Show the local population that rebellion is hopeless. Deneira agreed. But we must also be cautious. If we impose too harshly, we risk pushing neutral lords into the rebels' arms. We need the right balance. Let's focus on intelligence. Let's find those caches in the Western Hills first, then see if the references to Barra Hall and Draxfield lead anywhere. If we can strike at multiple cells before they unite, we'll cripple the plan. They set out the next morning. Deneira took a force of 30 cavalry and 20-foot soldiers riding north into the rocky hills where rumor placed one of Baldwin's hidden storerooms. Saran soared overhead on her drake, scouting for enemy watchfires. The trek proved arduous, winding paths, loose rock, and sudden drops that tested both horses and riders. A chill wind whipped at them. Twice they encountered suspicious tracks but found no sign of a major camp. On the third day, they discovered a cave partly concealed by an overhang of shale. Inside, her soldiers found crates bearing the Black Hawk crest, stuffed with crossbow bolts and sacks of black powder. The men destroyed or confiscated the weapons, collapsing part of the cave to ensure it could not be reused. Locals living in a nearby hamlet claimed ignorance, though Deneira suspected some had known more than they let on. By the time they returned to Orian's Crest, a week had passed since Baldwin's capture. In that interval, Saran's Drake sighted no Ironborn ships on the horizon and no new rebel forces openly gathered. It was a tense lull like the hush before a storm. Deneira's wound slowly improved under Helena's relentless care, though it still pained her if she moved too abruptly. She spent her waking hours questioning suspects, studying intelligence, and sending urgent messages to towns throughout the region, insisting on vigilance. One evening, while reviewing the ciphered fragments from Baldwin's desk, Deneira spotted a reference to a coded rendezvous near a place called Blackstone Tor in the Riverlands. The scraps hinted at a new handoff of contraband, possibly within a fortnight. She summoned Andros and Saran. This might be our chance to intercept another band of conspirators, she told them, tapping the parchment. Blackstone Tor. If we get there ahead of time and lie in wait, we could catch them as we did Baldwin. Andros frowned at the map. That's a long ride upriver, near the edges of the Riverlands. We'd be leaving the western shores exposed. That's true, Deneira conceded. But we can't sit idle. If these shipments are fueling the next wave of rebellion, we must cut them off. Our garrison can hold Orion's Crest for a time. Saran and I will lead a smaller expedition, 50 men, maybe 60. Enough to set an ambush. Saran nodded. It's a risk, but it might yield bigger results. We can't let the Ironborn or their local allies roam free. I can scout by Drake to ensure no large forces slip past us. They agreed to prepare. Over the next 2 days, Deneira assembled a hand-picked column of soldiers accustomed to forced marches and stealth operations. She left Andros in command at Orion's Crest, tasked with maintaining order and continuing the watch for any sign of rebellion. Then, just before dawn, Deneira and Saran led their men out of the fortress gates. The sky was a deep slate, stars flickering overhead. The chill air smelled of brine and pine. Banners snapped quietly in the breeze. Few words were spoken. Each man and woman present knew the gravity of the mission. They headed eastward along the coast, then veered inland where the wide rivers snaked toward the heart of Westeros. The roads were rutted and the farmland gave way to patches of dense forest. Deneira rode near the front, cloak flapping around her armor. Her shoulder ached, but she refused to let the pain slow her. Saran's Drake soared overhead in a lazy circle, occasionally diving low to scout for threats. After a day's travel, they made camp in the lee of a rocky hill, lighting small fires to keep warm. Deneira found little rest. She kept seeing Baldwin's scornful face in her mind and the Ironborn envoy's sneer. She wondered if they were rotting in the dungeons or if they'd tried to bribe guards. She pictured the Black Hawk crest, crates of powder, and the faces of families forced to live under constant fear. An empire built on dragons and steel could endure for centuries, but all it took was a single moment of weakness for everything to unravel. She forced herself to quell these doubts, reminding herself that vigilance was her duty. The next day's ride took them deeper into unfamiliar territory, rolling plains dotted by stands of oak and beech trees, occasionally broken by winding streams. Villages here had no memory of Orion's Crest or who ruled in the west. Their loyalty lay with old local houses or whomever collected taxes. Rhaenyra tried to keep her men disciplined, paying for supplies rather than requisitioning them by force, hoping to avoid sowing fresh resentment. News traveled, some recognized them as Valyrian warriors, though few had actually seen a drake in flight. Children ran out to gape at Saran's mount, which perched with serpentine grace on a nearby hill. On the third afternoon, they reached the fringes of the riverlands. The broad watercourses that gave the region its name glinted under a pale sun. Marshy ground squelched beneath hooves. Rumor placed Blackstone Tor somewhere among low, craggy hills near a tributary. As evening fell, Rhaenyra and Saran led an advance scout party to locate the vantage point. About 10 men accompanied them, leaving the main column behind to make camp discreetly. They found the Tor at twilight, a jagged outcropping of black rock perched over a bend in the river. It rose sharply from the surrounding terrain, shadowy and forbidding. A crooked tower-like formation jutted at the summit, crowned by sparse brush. From the lower slopes, one could see for miles along the water, and a narrow road ran close, perfect for a secret exchange under cover of darkness. Rhaenyra eyed the place warily, feeling an undercurrent of unease. It seemed designed for ambush or clandestine meetings. They dismounted behind a copse of willows and climbed on foot, leading their horses carefully. Saran's drake remained some distance away, hidden amid tall reeds where it could not be easily spotted from the road. Rhaenyra split the men into pairs to scout the perimeter of the Tor. She and Saran took the eastern side, picking a path through lichen-covered rocks. The glow of the setting sun cast long shadows, painting the stony outcrop in hues of red and gold. Near the crest, they found a flattened space shielded by a ring of boulders. No one appeared to be there now, but scattered footprints and overturned stones suggested recent activity. An old fire pit lay near the center, blackened stones ringed by ash. Rhaenyra crouched, running her gloved fingers through the cold embers. "Within a day or two, I guess," she murmured. "Someone camped here recently." Saran examined the footprints. Several sets, coming and going. Could be travelers, but the layout suggests they used this as a lookout. "If contraband is due here soon, we should hide and wait." A soldier joined them, reporting that the main road below was deserted at the moment. Rhaenyra nodded, determined. "We'll set an ambush at dusk. Half our men will conceal themselves near the Tor's base. The rest will watch from the crest. If anyone comes up with wagons or concealed cargo, we strike." They returned to the group, relayed instructions, and then guided the main column into carefully selected positions. The terrain made it easier to hide, with tall grasses and rock formations providing cover. Saran tethered her drake in a gully out of sight. Night fell fully, stars pricking the sky. The men huddled in silence, cloaks pulled tight against the chill. Rhaenyra lay prone behind a boulder, scanning the road below. Every breath reminded her of her wound's tightness, but she forced herself to remain still. Hours crawled by. The moon rose, silvering the river's surface. Once an owl hooted, making one of her men flinch. Another time a cart rattled down the road, but it carried only a local farmer with squeaking wheels, no sign of hidden arms. Midnight came and went. Rhaenyra's muscles ached from staying motionless. She debated calling off the ambush, suspecting misinformation or changed plans. But something urged her to persevere. At last, near the second hour past midnight, she heard soft sounds, the distant clop of hooves, the grind of wooden wheels. She tensed, pressing herself lower. Saran, beside her, nodded. They peered over the ridge. By moonlight, a small caravan emerged around a bend, 2 covered wagons, 3 riders, and what looked like a half-dozen armed men on foot, scanning the surroundings. The wagons rolled slowly, no lanterns lit, trying to move in stealth. Rhaenyra's pulse quickened. This had all the hallmarks of a clandestine shipment. She waited, breath shallow, as the figures guided the wagons off the road, closer to the base of Blackstone Tor. They halted by a patch of brush, pulling back the wagon's covering. Rhaenyra saw the unmistakable glint of steel crates marked by a faint black hawk crest. She clenched her fists. More contraband. But for whom? A rider dismounted, a tall silhouette. He beckoned to someone or something unseen, and a moment later, 2 men emerged from the darkness carrying smaller chests. Soft words drifted up the slope, unintelligible at this distance, but urgent. Rhaenyra raised her hand, the signal for her men to hold position. She wanted the smugglers to gather, to reveal themselves fully. Perhaps they expected a local contact to appear any moment. Then they would conduct their trade and she could strike. Minutes slipped by. The men around the wagon looked nervous, scanning the shadows. One stepped forward, evidently the leader. Moonlight caught his face, revealing scars across his cheek. His accent was Ironborn or possibly from the wilder coasts of Westeros. He hissed a question into the night. No answer. He repeated it, voice rising slightly with frustration. Then he turned to a companion. Daenerys could almost hear the conversation in her head. They're late. Where are they? At last, the leader barked an order. One of the footmen approached the wagon, hoisting a crate. He started up the slope, perhaps to check if the contact was waiting near the crest. Daenerys realized he might stumble upon her men. Time was short. She gave the signal, a curt slash of her hand through the air. Like wraiths, her soldiers erupted from hiding, bows at the ready. A volley of arrows whistled in the moonlight. 3 of the smugglers dropped instantly, shafts in their torsos. Others cried out in alarm, fumbling for swords or crossbows. The wagons jolted as the horses spooked. Daenerys and Saran sprang from behind their boulder, charging downhill. Their men followed. The stony ground made footing treacherous, but the smugglers were in worse disarray. The one leading the crate up the slope froze only to be struck by an arrow in the thigh. He collapsed with a scream. Another drew a crossbow, but Saran slashed him down with a quick sword stroke. The leader roared an Ironborn curse, tossing aside the lid of a crate. He snatched a black powder grenade from inside. Daenerys' heart lurched. These devices were dangerously volatile. She hurled herself behind a rock as he lit the fuse with a flint spark. A moment later, an explosion ripped through the night, blasting shards of rock and dirt. Her ears rang, a wave of heat passing over her. When she looked up, she saw 2 of her men flung aside, motionless. Snarling with fury, she pushed forward. Another smuggler tried to spark a second grenade, but an arrow from one of her archers took him in the arm, causing him to drop the device harmlessly before it ignited. Horses reared, whinnying in terror, half-tangled in wagon harnesses. Daenerys spied the leader again. He was sprinting for the river's edge, a single crate under his arm. She sprinted after him, teeth bared, ignoring the pounding in her shoulder. He reached the shoreline just as she caught up, tackling him into the shallows. They both hit the water with a splash, cold soaking Daenerys' legs. The crate tumbled free. He lashed out, a dirk in hand, but she bashed his wrist with her sword pommel, sending the weapon spinning. You're finished, she hissed. She wrestled him onto his back, pressing the blade to his throat. He stared at her, face twisted in pain and fury. Slowly his hand dropped. Behind them, the night was full of shouts, the clash of steel, the squeal of terrified horses. Smoke drifted across the tor from the explosion's aftermath. Tell me who you're meeting, Daenerys demanded. Name your contact. He spat, blood trickling from a cut on his lip. We answered to the hawk. You can kill me, but more will come. She pressed the blade, drawing a thin line of blood at his throat. Give me a name, or I end you here. He glared defiantly. The hawk is not a man. It's an idea. We sail under the banner of Captain Craggern. He's the one who took over from Rothnir. He'll be halfway up this river soon, carrying more crates. You can't stop them all. She felt a surge of triumph. A new name. Possibly a lead. She forced him onto his stomach, signaling a nearby soldier to bind his arms. Water dripped off her armor as she stood, chest heaving. In the distance, the fighting had subsided. Saran waved from near the wagons, the rest of the smugglers either dead or captured. Daenerys waded out of the shallows, dragging the smuggler behind her. Her wound throbbed, but adrenaline masked the worst of it. Moonlight revealed a scene of carnage. One wagon wheel had been splintered by the explosion, bodies lying in crumpled heaps around it. The second wagon was intact, crates still stashed under its tarp. Daenerys counted at least 4 smugglers dead. 2 more were unconscious. Her men had taken a few losses, 3 lay still, and another moaned with a mangled leg. Saran met Daenerys by the wagon. We found more black powder, crossbow bolts, even a few bars of refined steel from the free cities. This was definitely another major shipment. Daenerys looked around, breathing hard. We have a name, Captain Craggern. Might be the new Ironborn leader. They planned to meet a local contact here, but apparently that contact never showed. We must assume they'll try again somewhere else. She turned to the soldier holding the captive. Bind him, keep him alive for questioning. We need every scrap of information. Dawn found them picking through the wreckage under gray skies. The captured men refused to speak beyond curses, though Daenerys expected some would break under pressure. They stacked the contraband crates in the intact wagon, sealing them up. Despite the success of the ambush, her mood was grim. The Ironborn infiltration was deeper than she feared. Captain Craggern, the orchard fiasco, hints of multiple caches, it all spelled a simmering revolt waiting to boil over. They buried their dead at the crest of the tor, marking the graves with simple stones. Daenerys stood over them, silent, while the wind flapped her cloak. She found herself longing for reinforcements, for the unstoppable fury of a dragon's flame to burn away these scattered threats. But for now she only had her men and her will. That would have to suffice. They left the tour by midday, heading south along the river. Rhaenyra suspected the contact who never arrived might lurk in a nearby town or manor waiting for the wagons. They questioned farmers along the route to no avail. Either no one knew anything or they were too frightened to speak. By the second night the column was exhausted, having marched and fought with little rest. Rhaenyra found a hidden glade to camp in, setting triple sentries. Rain began to fall, a soft drizzle that soaked cloaks and dampened spirits. Rhaenyra huddled under a canvas lean-to with Saran and a few officers studying the map by lantern light. Each name on the parchment seemed to taunt them with how little time they had to avert a widespread crisis. Even if they cornered Captain Cragern, others might step in. The Black Hawk had become a hydra, sprouting new heads whenever one was cut. Morning arrived as a gray blur, and they resumed the search for leads. At last, near a small riverside settlement called Briar Ford, they got a faint whiff of the conspirators' presence. A local fisherman admitted that a band of armed men had passed through a day earlier, heading north. They asked about any noble or official in the area who might consort with criminals, but the fisherman only shook his head, muttering how everything's gone strange of late. With nothing more to go on, Rhaenyra's company pressed on, the sense of chasing shadows growing heavier. As days stretched on, the column covered hundreds of miles of muddy roads and tangled paths. Occasionally, they found faint traces, abandoned fire pits, footprints, a stray crate with a hawk brand. But the enemies never stood still. Word might have spread of Rhaenyra's strike at Blackstone Tor, and smugglers changed routes to avoid the same fate. The men grew weary. Supplies dwindled. The restless drizzle turned roads into muck, slowing their progress to a crawl. At one point, Saran took her drake aloft, scanning the countryside for miles around. She returned near dusk, landing in a swirl of leathery wings. No sign of large forces, but I saw smoke from the direction of 3 separate villages. It could be normal hearth fires or something else. Hard to tell. Rhaenyra clenched her fists. We can't chase every puff of smoke, or we'll accomplish nothing. She paced near their makeshift camp, water dripping from a sodden pine overhead. We need intelligence. This is pointless without clearer leads. One of her officers approached, clearing his throat. My lady, the men are cold and hungry. Morale is flagging. Perhaps we should return to Orian's Crest, regroup, then strike again once we have fresh instructions from your father. She glared at the mud, fighting a surge of frustration. But she realized he was right. They could not wander the riverlands indefinitely. They had battered a smuggler band at the Tor, seized another shipment. That was a victory, though a partial one. If more conspirators roamed free, they would learn soon enough. Best to consolidate, question the new prisoners thoroughly, and wait for any reinforcements or the arrival of that war dragon. At last, she gave a curt nod. We returned to Orian's Crest. Gather the men. Relieved, they broke camp at first light, turning their weary horses westward. The journey home was slow, the ground saturated with rain. The nights blurred together. Rhaenyra caught glimpses of frightened peasants, deserted hamlets, unharvested fields. Fear of bandits or war seemed to grip the land. No rebel armies stood in open defiance, yet unrest coiled beneath the surface. On the 6th day, the stony cliffs near the Sunset Sea reappeared, a familiar silhouette against a dull sky. Orion's Crest perched high on basalt promontories, its black walls frowning over the restless waves. With relief, Rhaenyra's men trudged up the winding approach. Sentries on the battlements recognized them and shouted a welcome, the gates rattling open. Inside the courtyard, the fortress staff rushed to greet them. As Rhaenyra dismounted, she felt every muscle protest. The gloom that clung to the fortress now seemed oddly comforting, at least here they had shelter and supplies. Andros met her at the steps leading into the keep, brow creased with concern. He bowed. My lady, you've returned safely. Did you find the smugglers? She gave him a weary nod, summarizing how they ambushed one band, seized contraband, but found no sign of a larger force. We have a few new prisoners in the wagon, plus the arms we captured. The ringleaders we found wouldn't name much beyond a new Ironborn contact called Cragern. Andros's expression darkened. I see. While you were gone, a raven arrived from your father. He says tensions in the east are worse. But he's dispatched a specialized dragonbinder named Hanero to help bring a war dragon from Valyria. They should arrive by sea soon, though no exact date is given. Also, he mentioned that certain members of the High Council still question the extent of the threat here. Rhaenyra felt a flicker of anger. They think we exaggerate? Let them face the black powder themselves. We've lost men already. Andros raised a placating hand. I understand. But politics in the freehold can be complicated. In any case, we must hold the line until Hynero comes. Once we have a war dragon, these rebels will think twice. She stared at the fortress gates, recalling how Baldwin and the Ironborn envoy had come through them in chains. Assuming we can find them in time, she said bleakly. Then she let out a breath. Very well. We'll rest, restock, and intensify our watch. The next move might be the rebels, not ours. The nights that followed were uneasy. Rhaenyra questioned the newly captured smugglers, gleaning only small crumbs. Cragorn's name was repeated like a talisman of fear. Some boasted he commanded a fleet of Ironborn reavers hidden in coves along the western coast. Others claimed he roamed inland with disguised caravans. None knew precisely where to find him. She grew to despise that name. Meanwhile, the fortress filled with the smell of damp wool and rank tension. Soldiers sharpened swords and fletched arrows, readying themselves for a conflict that might never manifest in open form. One morning, nearly 2 weeks after Rhaenyra's return, a shout rose from the watchtowers. She hurried to the ramparts, ignoring the flare of pain in her shoulder. Peering through a spyglass, she saw a ship in the distance, an elegant vessel with Valyrian sails. Beside her, Andros let out a soft exclamation. That must be Hynero's ship. Finally. Relief ward with caution. Rhaenyra ordered a signal fire lit, guiding the incoming vessel to the fortress's dock. She descended to the cove with a small honor guard. Waves crashed against black rocks, sending up foamy spray. The ship dropped anchor, and a skiff lowered to ferry passengers ashore. Rhaenyra watched intently, searching for any sign that this truly was the help she had prayed for. A tall figure in a dark cloak stepped onto the rocky beach. Even from a distance, the bearing was unmistakably Valyrian: silver hair, proud gait, an aura of quiet confidence. Beside him stood 2 assistants carrying a chest bound with iron latches. Hynero bowed as Rhaenyra and her men approached. Up close, she saw faint lines of age at his temples. He wore a medallion etched with runes of old magic, the kind used in forging bonds with dragons. Lady Rhaenyra, Hynero said formally, pressing a fist to his chest. I come under your father's orders, bringing what we need to hasten the arrival of a war dragon. The freehold bids you remain steadfast. Rhaenyra nodded, heart thudding with hope. You are most welcome, Hynero. Our situation is dire. How soon can we expect the dragon? His lips curved in a subtle smile. Soon, if the winds favor us. I've brought a newly matured drake from the breeding pens near Valyria's capital. He's on a ship a day's sail behind mine, accompanied by skilled dragon binders. We must prepare a secure nesting enclosure for his arrival. He'll not be as large as the oldest war dragons, but formidable nonetheless. Rhaenyra exhaled relief. Even a mid-sized war dragon would be a game-changer. We have an enclosure at the fortress, though it's rarely used. I'll have it readied at once. Hynero's gaze flicked across the rocky cove, taking in the basalt walls of Orian's Crest. Your father also instructed me to assist you in any magical defenses needed. The rebels we face are mundane in nature, but the Ironborn's cunning cannot be underestimated. If we suspect sabotage or infiltration, wards can be placed. Rhaenyra glanced at Andros, who nodded. We'll accept all help. Our foes strike from the shadows. We must ensure no sabotage endangers the dragon or the fortress. So it was settled. Hynero and his assistants were brought inside, escorted past watchful guards. Over the following days, they inspected the fortress's old dragon enclosure, a spacious courtyard with high walls previously used for housing small drakes. Hynero's men cleaned it thoroughly, reinforcing the gates and layering the walls with runic inscriptions to calm a dragon's temperament. The prospect of wielding draconic might buoyed the soldiers' spirits. Some began to boast that once Rhaenyra had her war dragon, the rebels would burn if they so much as raised a sword. While these preparations advanced, Rhaenyra continued scanning for any sign of Cragorn or local conspirators. Yet the land remained eerily quiet. No mass uprisings, no rumored gatherings. The lull frightened her more than open conflict. She doubted the hawk had folded so easily. In the war room, she and Saran analyzed map after map, searching for patterns. The coded letters seized from Baldwin still hinted at something bigger. Finally, on a brisk morning a week after Hynero's arrival, the watchtower rang out again. This time, a Valyrian galley appeared on the horizon, its hull designed with a wide deck for transporting precious cargo. Rhaenyra rushed to the ramparts, heart drumming. Through her spyglass, she saw the silhouette of a caged beast on the deck, a dragon, wings folded, tail lashing. She hurried down to the docks again, excitement tempered by caution. If the Ironborn attacked now, the timing would be catastrophic. But the seas appeared empty aside from the Valyrian galley. Once more, she stood on the rocky beach as the vessel anchored. The caged shape on the deck let out a high, piercing shriek. Chains rattled. Even from here, Deneira felt the stirring of an old, primal awe that accompanied dragons. Hanero hurried forward, instructing his assistants. A wide ramp was lowered from the ship to the shore. Sailors and dragonbinders formed lines. Step by step, they coaxed the young war dragon down the ramp. The beast hissed, tossing its scaled head, fiery eyes scanning the unfamiliar surroundings. Its wings, though not yet fully grown, were large enough to send a rush of wind across the beach. Deneira's mouth went dry. She had imagined this moment since she was small, a war dragon meant for her bond, an extension of her power and lineage. The creature was about 15 feet at the shoulder, perhaps 30 in length from snout to tail. Not massive by ancient standards, but enough to strike terror in any battlefield. Grayish-black scales gleamed in the cold sunlight, ridged spines running down its back. Hanero approached calmly, chanting in Valyrian. The dragon huffed, nostrils flaring. "This is Sharax's," Hanero announced. "He is newly blooded, strong in flame. The chain is for his own safety until he adjusts." Deneira approached slowly, an electric thrill coursing through her. The dragon's pupils narrowed to slits, focusing on her. She felt the faint tug of magic, the old bond of Valyrian blood, the intangible resonance that connected her to creatures born of fire. She raised a hand, though a soldier hovered behind her with a spear, just in case. Sharaxus snorted, hot breath bathing her in a sulfur scent. Her heart hammered, but she held her ground. Hanero murmured soft words, urging her to speak a phrase of draconic invocation. Deneira did so, voice trembling slightly. The young dragon cocked its head, exhaled a wisp of smoke, and let out a small, rumbling growl. Cautiously, she laid her palm against its scaled neck. The flesh was warm, vibrating with hidden energy. For a heartbeat, she and Sharaxus locked eyes, something ancient passing between them. A sudden surge of triumph filled Deneira. She felt at once elated and humbled, as though bridging a chasm that separated mortal men from living flame. This was what it meant to be Valyrian, dragon and rider united by blood and sorcery. All the battles, the nights of worry, the threats looming across Westeros. With Sharaxus at her side, she felt a renewed sense of possibility. She would not allow the Hawk or the Ironborn to undo the Freehold's centuries of dominion. She would burn away their illusions if necessary. Steadily, Hanero's team led Sharaxus up the winding path to Orian's Crest. Townsfolk in the fortress yard gawked at the sight. Even the soldiers felt a hushed awe, for a true war dragon had not graced these walls in years. The beast's claws scraped the basalt as it moved, tail thrashing in agitation. Within the dragon enclosure, they guided Sharaxus behind reinforced gates where fresh straw and a feeding trough of salted mutton awaited. Deneira stood watch until the rampart torches flared, enthralled by the dragon's raw vitality. That night, Hanero convened with Deneira, teaching her the initial steps of forging a deeper bond, ritual words, the posture for approach, how to feed the dragon carefully to nurture trust. He emphasized that while she possessed the bloodline, real kinship with a dragon took time and care. Deneira listened intently, yearning to accelerate the process. In the back of her mind, she pictured leading Sharaxus in flight, scorching entire bands of rebels in a single pass. But Hanero cautioned patience. A young war dragon was still dangerous, as prone to lashing out at a friendly hand as an enemy. In the days that followed, Deneira spent every spare moment with Sharaxus, coaxing the beast to accept her presence. She offered strips of meat, murmured in Valyrian, walked around the enclosure so Sharaxus would learn her scent. At times, the dragon snapped or hissed, forcing her to keep a careful distance. But gradually, Deneira felt the bond strengthening, a tenuous thread of empathy. She sensed the flicker of the dragon's moods, wariness, hunger, curiosity. Each time Sharaxus allowed her to come closer, her confidence soared. Her soldiers seemed equally eager for the day Sharaxus would take flight under Deneira's command. And yet, each sunrise brought the worry that rebel forces might strike. She received scattered reports of small raids in outlying villages, glimpses of men who vanished into the woods. No sign of a mass uprising, but the tension was undeniable. The Black Hawk rumor spread again, peasants whispering that shadowy figures were paying gold for any who would fight against the fortress. One morning, while Deneira was practicing with Sharaxus in the enclosure, Andris burst in, breathless. "My lady, urgent news from the southwestern roads. A group of travelers was found slain, wagons burned. Survivors claim men bearing the Black Hawk crest attacked them, claiming to be the true lords of Westeros." Deneira gently set aside the chunk of mutton she'd been offering Sharaxus. The dragon hissed in frustration, but she stroked its neck in apology. "Have we identified the men who died? Was it a Valyrian shipment?" Andros shook his head. Mostly merchants, it seems, though one was a local lord's steward carrying tribute for the fortress. The rebels seized everything, left their hawk scrawls on the road. It's an open challenge. She clenched her jaw. They've grown bold. Possibly they know we've diverted forces to other tasks. Where did this happen? Near the border between your father's domain and the next. The local garrisons are short-handed. They couldn't stop the attack in time. Daenerys glanced at Sharaxes, who snorted, tail whipping across the straw. A surge of fury blossomed in her. She was done playing whack-a-mole with these scattered bands. We need to respond decisively. Let's muster a strike force. I'll bring Sharaxes, we can at least attempt a short flight. Andros hesitated, eyeing the young dragon warily. Are you sure? You've only just begun training with him. He might lash out or panic midair. She met Sharaxes' glowing eyes, feeling the pulse of draconic heat. If I can direct him even briefly, it might shock the rebels into scattering. That's better than letting them think we hide behind our walls. Andros bowed. As you wish. I'll ready the men. We can depart within an hour. Daenerys touched the dragon's flank. Sharaxes, we have work to do. She turned to Hannero, who was quietly observing from a corner. I need your help in saddling him, if possible. Or at least in harnessing him enough for a short flight. Hannero's brow furrowed, but he nodded. We'll try. He's young, but if you maintain calm, he may accept the harness. They hurried to prepare. A specially crafted dragon harness had come with the ship, thick straps of leather ringed with steel loops designed to sit behind the dragon's neck ridges. Under Hannero's guidance, Daenerys and several stable hands carefully approached Sharaxes, buckling the harness around the scaled torso. The creature fidgeted, emitting low growls. Daenerys kept whispering gentle phrases in Valyrian, petting the ridges near his eyes. Eventually, Sharaxes allowed the harness to be fastened, though his tail lashed in annoyance. With a boost from Hannero, Daenerys mounted the dragon's back. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it would burst. She gripped the harness loops, feeling the beast's muscles shift under her. Sharaxes spread his wings partway, letting out a guttural hiss. The stable hands scrambled back, wary of a sudden takeoff. Hannero raised a hand, murmuring an incantation of calm. Daenerys steadied herself, inhaling the sulfuric tang that wafted from Sharaxes' scales. All right, she breathed, voice trembling with adrenaline. Let's see if he'll take flight. Carefully, she leaned forward, guiding the reins that attached to the harness. In truth, controlling a dragon was more about mental coaxing and subtle weight shifts than mechanical reins, but every bit helped. Sharaxes braced his hind legs, eyes darting about as though uncertain. Daenerys felt his body coil with potential energy. She pressed gently with her knees, repeating the Valyrian word for ascend. With a powerful sweep of his wings, Sharaxes launched from the courtyard, nearly sending Daenerys tumbling backward. She clung to the harness for dear life as the fortress walls blurred. Wind tore at her face, her hair whipping free of its braid. Below, soldiers stared in awe, pointing upward. The dragon's flight was not yet smooth and he wobbled in the air, beating wings to gain altitude. Daenerys' stomach flipped, but she forced herself to remain calm, projecting reassurance. Sharaxes leveled off, circling once above Orian's crest. Daenerys gazed at the sea, the black stone battlements, the courtyard far below. Exhilaration clashed with the raw terror of riding a half-trained war dragon. She nudged Sharaxes gently, directing him to land. With a guttural cry, he angled his wings and descended, thumping onto the basalt with a jarring impact. Daenerys gasped, nearly thrown. She patted his neck, praising him in a shaky voice. Soldiers erupted in cheers. Some brandished spears in salute. It was only a short test flight, but it confirmed that the bond was forming. Daenerys dismounted, knees weak, adrenaline surging. Hannero approached, relief plain on his face. You did well, but do not push him too fast. She nodded, heart still pounding. We'll fly out with the men, but keep it short. Even a glimpse of Sharaxes overhead might be enough to scatter these rebel bandits. Within an hour, Daenerys and a contingent of 40 riders set out from the fortress with Sharaxes harnessed once more. Saran elected to ride with the ground force this time, letting Daenerys handle the dragon alone, though she promised to draw off any archers who might dare fire at the sky. The plan was simple. Daenerys would scout from above, locate the raiders if possible, and direct the cavalry to strike. If the rebels resisted, Sharaxes would unleash flame from above. They rode fast down the coastal road, Daenerys guiding Sharaxes at a low glee. To just behind them, the noise of the dragon's wing beats overshadowed the clatter of hooves, sending flocks of seabirds wheeling away in panic. Villagers gaped as the procession thundered past. Some cowered, recognizing the dark outline of a war dragon overhead. Others stared in awe, half disbelieving such power was real. By midday, they reached the southwestern crossroads where the merchants had been attacked. The road was still scorched in places from the rebel torches, scattered debris testifying to violence. Deneira, flying overhead, scanned the rolling fields beyond the road. No sign of an enemy force, only windblown grass. She circled with sharp axes, feeling the strain in her arms from gripping the harness, the beast's muscles flexing beneath her. A trickle of sweat ran down her temple. She tried to project calm, though her heart hammered with the intensity of flight. Saran led the cavalry along the road, searching for tracks. At last, one of the riders spotted wagon ruts leading away to the west. Deneira descended, letting sharp axes drop heavily onto the earth. The cavalry parted to let her land. She dismounted, dizzy from the adrenaline. Saran cantered over, pointing to the faint tracks. It looks like whoever attacked moved on quickly. Shall we follow? Deneira glanced at sharp axes, who hissed, clearly unsettled by the jarring landings. Yes, she decided. I'll keep him on the ground for now. He's not ready for extended flight. We'll track these ruts. The rebels can't have gone far. They followed the trail for miles, winding across a series of gentle hills. Thick stands of gorse and bracken made it easy for bandits to hide. Deneira felt tension coil tighter with each step. Sharaxes trudged beside her, wings half-folded, letting out occasional growls. The cavalry fanned out in a scouting line. But after hours of searching, they found no sign of the raiders, only an abandoned campsite with cold embers. The ruts petered out near a rocky ridge, and no one could determine which way the rebels had gone next. Frustration mounted. Deneira hissed a curse in Valyrian. The men shifted uneasily. They had come all this way brandishing the might of a war dragon, yet the rebels remained elusive. She mounted Sharaxes again, taking a short flight over the surrounding area, but the rugged hillsides offered countless hiding places. By nightfall, they had to concede that the bandits were gone, likely scattering into small groups. Raiding merchants on open roads and disappearing, that was the tactic of an enemy too wily to face them in pitched battle. Defeated for the moment, Deneira ordered the contingent to return to Orian's Crest, acknowledging that they couldn't scour every hill and ravine in the region. The men trudged back wearily, disheartened. Even Sharaxes seemed restless, snapping at a soldier who ventured too close. Deneira understood the frustration. She had pinned her hopes on a decisive show of force. Instead, they found only empty roads and ashes. When they reached the fortress, she stabled Sharaxes in the enclosure, ensuring he had enough meat and quiet. The beast prowled in circles, clearly feeding off her own agitation. She forced herself to spend time calming him, brushing the edges of his scaled neck with a stiff-bristled brush. Dragons responded to their rider's emotions, and if she remained tense, so would he. Yet inwardly, her thoughts churned. The Hawk's plan was working. Constant raids and vanishings, no open battles, forcing Valyrian forces to spread thin. The arrival of Sharaxes was not the crushing blow she had hoped for. The next week followed a similar pattern. Deneira sent out patrols in all directions, sometimes accompanying them on Sharaxes for short flights. Rarely did they catch more than a few stray bandits. Rumors suggested that Captain Craggorn himself lurked somewhere along the coast, but no one could pinpoint where. Baldwin rotted in the dungeons, refusing to speak. The Ironborn envoy sneered each time he was questioned. Meanwhile, local villages complained about taxes and the heavy-handed sweeps of Valyrian soldiers. Dissatisfaction simmered, exactly what the rebels wanted. Even so, Deneira refused to yield. She honed her bond with Sharaxes daily, practicing flights around Orian's Crest. Each success strengthened their link. She felt the dragon's power more vividly, sensed its hunger for the open sky, for the thrill of flame. Occasionally, Sharaxes would belch fire at a distant target, scorching the basalt with a roar. Deneira recognized that if the Hawk's rebels ever gathered in one place, she could annihilate them with a single pass of Dragonfire. But the Hawk refused to stand and fight. At last, a small breakthrough came from an unexpected quarter. One of the captured smugglers at the fortress, battered by illness and fear, begged to speak with Deneira. He claimed he had new information about Craggorn's next move. Deneira met him in a cramped cell, accompanied by Saran. The smuggler, a gaunt man with a raw cough, knelt on the straw. He pleaded for mercy. "I'll give you something, my lady," he said, voice quavering. "I heard that Craggorn plans a bold strike at a major target. Something that'll turn all eyes on him." Deneira tensed. "What target?" He swallowed, glancing at the guards. "I only heard talk from one of his lieutenants. Something about a festival or event in a big city killing important nobles to spark widespread panic. They mentioned Lannisport, but I'm not certain. Could be another place. They want to show that the Hawk can strike anywhere." Deneira's pulse spiked. Lannisport was a major hub on the western coast, seat of House Lannister before Valyria's rule. She had not considered it might be vulnerable. When? He shook his head. Not sure. Soon. They said something about a harvest gathering where local lords would be present, plus some from the freehold. That's all I know. She traded a grim look with Saran. If Cragorn's men assault Lannisport or a large festival, the casualties would be horrific. It would undermine our stability even further. She turned back to the smuggler. Why tell me this now? His eyes flickered with desperation. I'm dying from this lung fever. I just want a chance at redemption. Spare me so I can see my family again. That's all I ask. Daenerys studied him, wondering if it was a trick. Yet her instincts said he was sincere, a broken man hoping for mercy. We'll see, she said. If your information proves valid, I'll consider leniency. He bowed his head, coughing violently. Daenerys exited the cell, mind churning. She conferred with Saran in the corridor. If they plan to strike Lannisport, we need to warn the authorities. The city is well fortified, but a sudden attack from within using black powder could wreak havoc. Saran nodded. Agreed. We can't ignore this lead. Even if it's uncertain, the risk is too high. Daenerys summoned Andros and explained. He too looked alarmed. Lannisport is wealthy, populous, and always has some festival or gathering. If the hawk wants maximum impact, that's the place to strike. They wasted no time. Ravens were sent to Lannisport's governor, a Valyrian administrator, warning of a potential rebel plot. Daenerys also planned to travel there in person with Sharaxes to oversee security measures and root out Cragorn's infiltration if possible. Andros would remain at Orian's Crest while Saran accompanied Daenerys. Their best chance to stop a massacre was direct intervention. Though the flight to Lannisport was a few days' ride or a shorter flight by dragon, Daenerys opted to bring a modest cavalry detachment on the road while she and Saran alternated between riding and flying. Sharaxes was not yet strong enough for extended flights carrying 2 riders, so Saran would remain mostly on horseback. The day before their departure, Daenerys spent hours carefully packing supplies, ensuring the fortress defenses were in place. She prayed the hawk would not attempt a major strike here while she was gone. Dawn broke with a sharp wind off the sea. Daenerys led her force of 40 riders out the gates once more, Sharaxes pacing beside them on foot until they reached flatter terrain. Then she mounted him, sword ahead, and circled back to guide the column. They made good time, passing through farmland and villages that once welcomed Baldwin's Crest. At midday, they halted at a river crossing for a brief rest, Sharaxes curling near the water's edge to lap at the current. Locals gawked from a distance. As they continued westward, Daenerys' tension built. She pictured Lannisport, a city of golden spires and thick walls, still overshadowed by the memory of House Lannister's old glory before the Valyrians arrived. If the Hawksmen had infiltrated, they might plant black powder caches around the city, poised to blow key gates or assemblies. Stopping them required swift, decisive action and cunning. She did not relish a citywide manhunt. 2 days later, the outskirts of Lannisport came into view, broad fields leading to a busy harbor. The sun shimmered on the waves, ships of various sizes crowding the docks. Towering beyond the piers rose the city walls, stone battlements manned by Valyrian garrisons. Beyond them, Daenerys glimpsed tall buildings, ornate manses, and the glint of gold in the architecture, the city's emblematic wealth. Sharaxes uttered a throaty hiss from the sky overhead, drifting on the breeze. The sight of a dragon caused alarm among sailors and fishermen who pointed up with shouts of surprise or fear. Rarely did a war dragon visit Lannisport. Daenerys landed outside the main gate, her cavalry approaching on the road behind her. Guards in Valyrian livery recognized her standard, quickly opening the gates. Inside the walls, the city bustled with life, market stalls piled with goods, caravans arriving for trade, inns full of travelers. Though Lannisport was under Valyrian authority, many of its proud citizens remembered a time when House Lannister ruled the western lands. Daenerys felt their stares. Many parted respectfully, but not all looked welcoming. The presence of a dragon overshadowed everything. She was met by the city's governor, a Valyrian named Valtaris, who rushed out of a grand building near the central square. He bowed, looking both flustered and worried. Lady Daenerys, your raven gave us quite a shock. You suspect a major plot against Lannisport? We've seen no sign of trouble. The city is preparing for the harvest fair this week, but everything is peaceful. Daenerys dismounted from Sharaxes, handing the reins to a soldier who guided the dragon to a wide courtyard near a guard tower. Peaceful until it's not, she replied, removing her helm. The hawk wants a grand statement and the harvest fair is an ideal time. Have you searched for black powder or suspicious gatherings? Valtaris wrung his hands. We've posted extra watchmen, but the city is large. Many come for the fair, traders, entertainers, pilgrims. We can't close the gates entirely without causing panic. Deneira nodded. Then we do targeted searches. Any wagon or cart that looks suspicious, check it thoroughly. Interrogate travelers who carry large crates, especially if they match the Black Hawk crest. Also, keep an eye on local houses that might have reason to conspire. There's a rumor of one Lord Barrowhall somewhere in the south who might be aligned with the Hawk. If any such name arises, let me know. Valtaris nodded vigorously. We'll do what we must. Your dragon is most welcome as a deterrent. No rebel would dare open battle with a war dragon overhead. Deneira forced a tight smile. They may not fight openly, but they could sabotage from within. I'll coordinate with you daily until we're certain the fair is safe. With that, she and her retinue were escorted to a secure barracks near the city's western wall where Sharaxes could be stabled in a large courtyard. The dragon hissed at the unfamiliar environment, flaring his wings at curious onlookers. Deneira had to calm him repeatedly, offering chunks of meat to keep him still. That night, she met with local guard captains, instructing them on the tactics the rebels might use. They drew up contingency plans for evacuation if any bombs detonated. The tension of the city's approaching harvest fair pressed on her mind. The Hawk could strike at any moment, or not at all, leaving everyone on edge. Days passed in a blur of patrols, street checks, and fruitless leads. Lannisport's residents bustled about, determined to celebrate the fair despite rumors of danger. Colorful banners hung over the avenues, minstrels played in the squares, and vendors touted spiced wine and fresh pastries. Deneira posted her cavalry at strategic points, soared above the city on Sharaxes to show a visible show of force. Now and then she spied knots of peasants craning their necks to watch. Perhaps the rebels would be cowed into silence. Perhaps not. Then, on the eve of the Harvest Fair's grand opening, a suspicious wagon was stopped at the southern gate. Guards discovered casks of black powder hidden under sacks of grain. The driver, confronted, tried to flee, but was pinned by a crossbow bolt. Taken alive, he claimed ignorance, saying someone paid him to deliver the wagon to a certain cellar near the harbor. Deneira, sensing a trap, assembled a strike team at once. Saran joined her, swords at the ready. Under cover of night, they raided the cellar the driver mentioned, a dilapidated warehouse near the harbor. Inside, they found crates marked with the Black Hawk crest, fuses, and more powder casks. It was enough to blow half the district sky-high if set properly. Shock rippled through the city guard. Deneira's men quickly confiscated everything, dragging it outside. No rebels were present, though signs suggested they had been there recently. Deneira felt a sickening mix of relief and dread. They'd foiled one bomb site. But what if there were more? That question was answered at dawn when alarms rang through the harbor district. Smoke poured from a ship moored at a far pier, and the thunder of an explosion rocked the early morning gloom. Deneira, jolted awake in her quarters, scrambled to gather arms. She emerged to find a pillar of black smoke rising over the waterfront. Saran dashed to her side, half-dressed in armor. We have sabotage in the harbor. Deneira raced to the courtyard where Sharaxes was kept. Soldiers were already panicking as the dragon roared at the sight of the flames. She hastily saddled him with help from stable hands, ignoring the frantic swirl around her. Then she mounted, urging Sharaxes into flight. The beast took off, wings hammering the air. They soared above the city rooftops, heading for the harbor. People below scrambled like ants, some fleeing the wharves, others trying to extinguish fires. As Deneira flew closer, she saw the remains of a merchant ship listing in the water, half its hull blown apart. Flaming debris floated around it, threatening to ignite other vessels. Dockworkers yelled and threw buckets of water in vain. She circled overhead, scanning for any sign of rebels. Then she spotted shapes sprinting across the pier, weaving between crates. One carried a small cask, a fuse sparking at the top. Deneira felt her blood run cold. They were heading for a larger galley moored just 100 yards away. She urged Sharaxes downward. The dragon, sensing her urgency, folded wings in a swift dive. Dockworkers scattered in terror. The rebels looked up, alarmed by the descending beast. Before they could hurl the bomb, Deneira guided Sharaxes to unleash a spurt of flame. The burst of fire enveloped the pier, blasting crates into shards. The rebel with the bomb vanished in a gout of flame, cask exploding prematurely. Flames roiled outward, sending chunks of the pier splintering into the harbor. Deneira pulled Sharaxes up, battered by a wave of heat. The dragon roared triumphantly, smoke wreathing his jaws. She circled back, spotting one or two rebels diving off the pier into the water where burning debris floated. No doubt they would drown or be consumed by flame. She scanned the keys for further threats. Below, city guards poured in, dragging survivors away from the fire. Another bomb had been defused, but at dreadful cost. The merchant ship was a wreck, the pier heavily damaged. Smoke stung Daenerys' eyes as she flew overhead. When the chaos subsided, Daenerys landed near the ruined pier, Sharaxes snarling at the flames. The wreckage crackled with dying embers and stunned dockworkers coughed in the smoky air. Saran arrived on horseback with a squad, quickly organizing a fire brigade. Together, they managed to keep the blaze from spreading further. Daenerys helped coordinate the rescue, her throat choked with sooty air. At least a dozen people lay dead or burned. Civilians wailed over loved ones lost. The cost of sabotage was painfully clear. In the aftermath, they discovered Black Hawk graffiti scrawled on a wall near the pier. A chilling message was scrawled beneath, "The Hawk strikes anywhere. Your dragon cannot save you." Daenerys stared at the words, fury pulsing in her veins. Even with Sharaxes overhead, the rebels had managed to wreak havoc. She felt the first seeds of doubt nibble at her pride. Was there any way to fully stop an enemy who refused pitched battles, instead relying on bombs and stealth? The city reeled from the shock of the harbor attack. Governor Valtaris declared a lockdown on the gates, no one in or out without thorough questioning. The harvest fair was cancelled, replaced by a mourning vigil for the victims. Daenerys patrolled the streets on Sharaxes daily, her presence instilling both fear and a measure of security in the populace. But the rebels had vanished into the city's underbelly or fled entirely. Frantic searches turned up empty safe houses, leftover fuses, fragments of hawk-painted crates, nothing that led to Craggern or a key ringleader. Despite having a dragon, Daenerys felt the rebels' shadow lengthening. They could do anything, strike anywhere, slip away. The sabotage in Lannisport was proof. She feared the next wave of attacks might be even deadlier. In restless dreams, she imagined entire city blocks going up in black powder while she circled helplessly on Sharaxes. An empire that once conquered these lands with dragons now struggled to contain guerrilla warfare. Yet she refused to concede. Gathering her war council in Lannisport, she laid out a new plan. She would reach out once more to her father, demanding more resources or at least permission to enact harsh measures, curfews, mass confiscations of suspicious goods. If the Hawk thrived on infiltration, perhaps starve it of the means to operate. Even if it risked alienating the local populace further, she saw no choice. A row of exhausted city guards listened numbly, their trust in her overshadowed by fear of the next bomb. The day she was set to finalize these measures, a fresh rider galloped through Lannisport's gates. He was a scout from Orian's Crest, breathing hard and covered in dust. Daenerys met him in the courtyard. He bowed swiftly, then gasped out the news, "My lady, you must return at once." Orian's Crest was attacked. Craggern led a group of Ironborn raiders at dawn. They hit the fortress harbor from the sea and battered the walls. "There are fires. Andros sent me to summon you and the dragon." Daenerys felt the blood drain from her face. "Attacked? How our garrison was strong. They brought ships armed with black powder bombs," the scout explained, voice shaking. "Part of the wall collapsed. Andros and the men are fighting valiantly, but they need you." Shock and rage flared in her chest. So while she chased leads in Lannisport, Craggern had struck. Orion's Crest itself, the seat of her power. She clenched her fists. "We leave at once," summoned Saran. "Prepare Sharaxes for immediate departure." The scout bowed again, panting. "Yes, my lady. Hurry." She whirled, barking orders to the city guard. They would have to hold Lannisport in her absence. The Black Hawk was cunning enough to stage simultaneous threats. She prayed the city would remain safe for a few days. Mounting Sharaxes, she signaled Saran and her cavalry to follow by road. But she would not wait. She spurred Sharaxes into the sky, ignoring the weary ache in the dragon's wings from recent flights. Rage fueled her. The Hawk dared assault her fortress? She would show them what it meant to stir the wrath of a dragon rider. Sharaxes rose, the city shrinking below. Daenerys urged him westward, across the rolling plains. The wind roared in her ears, tears streaming from the corners of her eyes. She whispered encouragement, pushing the dragon to greater speed. If the Hawk truly had come for Orion's Crest, she would burn Craggern's ships to cinders. They had demanded a war of sabotage and terror. Well, she would answer with fire and fury, and by the night's end, the basalt fortress would stand or fall on the backs of those who dared challenge old Valyria. It was a long flight, and midday bled into evening. The horizon glowed with the last embers of sunlight. Daenerys refused to slow. Her muscles cramped from gripping the harness, and sharp axes panted from exertion. At last, as dusk settled, she glimpsed the jagged silhouette of Orion's crest ahead. Flames flickered along part of the outer wall. Smoke curled into the sky. Rhaenyra's heart clenched. The fortress that had withstood centuries of storms now bore the scars of black powder and Ironborn rage. She descended in a swift arc, scanning the harbor below. A cluster of ships lay at anchor, flames licking one vessel's deck. Traces of debris dotted the water, and blasts of smoke indicated bombs had been used. Rhaenyra heard faint echoes of battle, metal clashing, shouts rising from the ramparts. Her eyes narrowed. She let out a trembling breath, then guided Sharaxes into a dive over the largest enemy ship. With a roar, the dragon spewed fire. The vessel's sails ignited instantly, the deck consumed. Crewmen shrieked, diving overboard. Rhaenyra circled for another pass, searching for Cragorn's colors. Below, an Ironborn longship bristling with men moved closer to the fortress's damaged wall. They wore the hawk crest scrawled over battered armor. More bombs were being readied. Fury surged in Rhaenyra. She angled Sharaxes downward. Another gush of flame engulfed the deck. The bombs exploded on the spot, ripping the longship apart in a geyser of fire and splintered timbers. A wave of heat blasted Rhaenyra's face, nearly unseating her. Sharaxes screeched, banking hard. She scanned the ramparts. Part of the outer wall had collapsed into the sea, revealing a breach where Ironborn warriors clashed with fortress guards. Andros's banner was visible on a nearby tower, rallying the defenders. Determined to help, Rhaenyra guided Sharaxes onto the broad walkway above. The dragon landed with a crunch of stone, tail lashing. Below, Ironborn raiders recoiled in terror at the sight of the beast. The fortress soldiers let out a ragged cheer. Rhaenyra swung down from the saddle, sword in hand, ignoring her trembling limbs. Andros emerged from behind a crumbled battlement, bleeding from a cut on his forehead. "My lady," he gasped, relief warring with exhaustion. Cragorn's men came at dawn. They battered the walls with bombs. Many are inside, fighting in the courtyard. We're trying to hold the inner keep. Rhaenyra's eyes flashed. Then we'll drive them out. She gestured to Sharaxes. I'll have the dragons scour them from the courtyard. Send word to the men to clear the open areas, or they'll be caught in the flames. Andros saluted and dashed off, shouting orders. Rhaenyra climbed back onto Sharaxes, urging the dragon to climb atop the fortress ramparts. From there, she peered into the courtyard below. A swirl of chaos greeted her. Burning debris, Ironborn raiders brawling with fortress guards, smoke rising from shattered walkways. This was not sabotage at the fringes. This was a direct assault on her seat of power. She raised her sword, letting her voice ring out. All defenders, clear the courtyard. Fall back to the inner keep walls. The men below recognized her cry, some pointing up at the silhouette of the dragon. They scrambled behind half-toppled barricades, leaving the raiders in the open. The Ironborn, seeing the massive shape overhead, tried to scatter, but it was too late. Rhaenyra hissed the command word. Sharaxes opened his jaws and spewed a torrent of flame across the courtyard. Tongues of fire licked the stones, engulfing the raiders in a deadly inferno. Screams rose, drowned out by the roar of the dragon's breath. Bodies flailed, weapons clattered to the ground, armor glowing red-hot before men collapsed. Rhaenyra guided Sharaxes carefully, ensuring the flames did not spread too far. Her heart pounded. The stench of burning flesh wafted up, sickening but necessary. A rebel force bold enough to storm Orion's crest deserved no mercy. She unleashed a second burst of flame for any stragglers. Charred remains littered the courtyard. Plumes of black smoke billowed skyward. At last, the immediate threat seemed quelled. Rhaenyra landed Sharaxes on a portion of the courtyard still intact, men bowing or staggering back in awe. She dismounted, sword still in hand, scanning for Cragorn. One Ironborn figure stumbled from behind a broken cart, clothes alight. He collapsed in a smoldering heap. Others lay strewn about, No sign of a tall, commanding presence, no sign of the hawk's mastermind. She cursed. Perhaps he lurked somewhere else. Andras and a group of soldiers approached, face grimy with soot. We've driven them from the breach, my lady. Some might still be in the halls. We're searching now. So far, no sign of Cragorn himself. She seethed. He would not lead such a raid only to vanish. Check the dungeons, the upper towers, anywhere a raider might hide. We'll drag him out. She turned, seeing a cluster of Ironborn prisoners guarded at spear point. She marched over, seizing one by the hair. Where's Cragorn? She demanded. The prisoner coughed, spitting blood. Gone. Slipped away. He said he'd see your fortress burn. Daenerys let him drop. Her gaze swept the devastation. Fires crackled along the battlements, timbers collapsed. Part of the fortress indeed burned, though the stone construction limited the spread. She felt a cold rage crystallizing inside her. For centuries, Orian's Crest had withstood every challenge. Now it lay scarred by the Hawk's bombs. And the Hawk's leader had escaped to continue his war elsewhere. This was no final battle, only a brutal chapter. As her men fought the lingering pockets of Ironborn, Daenerys assisted in dousing flames, leading Sharaxes to intimidate any resistors. By dawn, the fortress was secure once more, but at heavy cost, dozens of dead, walls crumbling, spires blackened by soot. Helena and her assistants rushed among the wounded, triaging burned flesh and broken bones. Daenerys surveyed the wreckage from a vantage point near the main keep. Smoke stung her eyes, tears threatening to well up. She had arrived barely in time to save Orion's Crest from total collapse. Saran stumbled in from the main gates, having arrived with her cavalry hours too late to prevent the initial damage. She looked stricken. We lost so many. And Cragorn, he's not among the bodies. At least we destroyed several of his ships, but apparently not the one he was on. Daenerys' fists trembled at her sides. He's playing a game of blood, and we're always one step behind. She forced a steadying breath, remembering that as terrible as the assault was, the fortress still stood. We keep going. This is what it means to rule, Saran. We can't let them see us broken. Not while Sharaxes lives. Not while Valyria endures. Saran grasped Daenerys' hand gently, eyes reflecting the shared burden. I'm with you, she said, voice heavy. Together, they looked out over the smoldering remains of the courtyard, the battered stones, the huddled survivors. Daenerys' gaze drifted to Sharaxes, crouched on a partially collapsed wall, smoke rising from his nostrils. In that image lay the future, a once unassailable empire now tested by cunning rebels and cunning raiders. Blood and fire still reigned, but the cost was mounting. If the Hawk would not stand and fight openly, Daenerys would hunt it down piece by piece, scouring every hidden nest until the Black Hawk's wings were torn away. She had no other choice. Valyria's hold on Westeros would not slip on her watch, no matter the storms of rebellion or the cunning of Ironborn. She was a dragon rider now, and her vow burned as hot as Sharaxes' flame.